I ended up with my mother's childhood sweetheart, his 15 years older than me, a proper uncle figure, dating an older man. Overall, the experience wasn't great, because he didn't love me. Hello, everyone, welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful novels every day. Now the story begins. My mother was a woman who prioritized love above all else. At 22, she tasted forbidden fruit and gave birth to me, while Marius was 7 years younger than her. Perhaps it's because I lacked paternal love since childhood, but I've had a secret crush on this man who's 15 years older than me for a very long time. Marius is 35 this year. He's pursued my mother for many years without success and remains single. Today, under pressure from family, he went on a blind date. He said the woman was nice, pretty, well-spoken, with good family background and education, but he just didn't feel any spark. So right after the blind date, he told the woman straight up that they weren't really compatible. Because of this, his family had a huge fight with him, even to the point where his father threatened to sever their father-son relationship. Feeling upset in the afternoon, he came to my place looking for my mom to drink with him, but as it happened, she had just gone to work an extra night shift, leaving only me at home. Marius reminded me to be careful at home and was about to leave when I stopped him. I bit my lip and mustered the courage to ask him, "Marius, how about I keep you company for a drink?" Since childhood, I've always rudely called him by his first name. At first, my mother scolded me a few times, but as I kept doing it, they all eventually got used to it. Marius stood by the window watching me, his shirt buttoned to the third button, revealing a glimpse of collarbone. The fading sunset cast a pale golden light that gilded the corners of his eyes and brows. They say time spares no one, yet it seems to have been especially kind to Marius. He's 35 years old now, yet in that white shirt, he looks no different from those young men in their 20s. He smiled. "Do you drink?" I lifted my chin proudly. "Of course, I'm the god of drinking in our factory." At 20, I hated studying and dropped out after high school to work in the factory. Marius was amused by me. He crooked his finger. "Come on, Uncle Marius will treat you to dinner." Marius wanted to take me to a Western restaurant, but I refused. I knew he had money, but I still didn't want to spend his. And besides, I didn't like that kind of atmosphere. It always made me feel constrained. So, I dragged Marius to a street-side food stall. On an early autumn evening at summer's end, skewers and beer were obviously the way to go. Marius and I have always gotten along well. He's knowledgeable and well-traveled. Whether I'm dabbling with my limited literary knowledge or discussing the hottest heartthrobs of the moment, he can always chime in and debate with me on equal footing. To be honest, I really don't understand why my mother has never liked this kind of Marius. Once, I casually asked my mom, pretending it was no big deal. I said, "Marius is so great. Why have you never approved of him all these years?" My mom just smiled faintly. Her explanation was only 6 words. "Not suitable, not liked." This truly matches my mother's personality. She's the most free-spirited woman I've ever known. In her early 20s, she met someone she loved and threw caution to the wind, but she chose wrong. She encountered a scoundrel. When he learned she was pregnant, my father vanished without a trace. So my mother, in her characteristic free-spirited way, decided to have me on her own, and to this day, she hasn't found another partner. There's always been this particularly dashing aura about her. When she loves, she loves. When she's wrong, she's wrong. She admits her mistakes and dares to bear the consequences. Precisely because of this, we all understand that she truly doesn't love Marius, because she doesn't love him. She'd rather stay single for 20 years than settle for less. I talked a lot with Marius, except for the fact that I like him. Perhaps it was the alcohol. Marius also became more relaxed than usual. No longer the gentle and refined image he usually portrayed. He slightly loosened his collar and chatted with me about the amusing incidents he'd encountered at the company recently. When something particularly funny came up, he would laugh heartily. This side of him seemed much more real than his usual self. We talked a lot and drank even more. By the end, we were both drunk. Marius paid the bill and offered to take me home, but I playfully clung to his arm. "No way. If my mom finds out I've been drinking, she'll definitely scold me." So, with my whining and pestering, Marius ended up taking me to his place instead. I sent my mom a message, telling her I'd be sleeping at the factory dormitory tonight. This wasn't my first time at Marius's place. I effortlessly changed into slippers, then rummaged through his bedroom closet for one of his shirts before heading to the bathroom. After showering, I changed into Marius's clothes. His shirt was oversized, barely covering my thighs. When I walked out dressed like this, Marius, who was sobering up on the couch, froze in shock. After a dazed pause, his face flushed red as he quickly turned away, frowning and saying, "Wear your own clothes." I walked over and sat beside him, cooing. My clothes got all wet from the shower. The living room was dimly lit. Leaning against Marius, I clearly noticed his Adam's apple bobbing subtly. He pursed his lips and suddenly stood up. "I'll go buy you a set." "No." I coquettishly protested, suddenly reaching out to grab his wrist, then immediately stood up as well. "Marius." With the help of alcohol, my courage grew significantly. I grabbed his wrist and leaned in closer. "Am I beautiful?" Marius paused for a moment, then fixed his gaze on my face, scrutinizing me carefully before answering honestly. Yes, I knew I was beautiful. I had inherited my mother's good looks, sharing a resemblance in the eyes and brows, since childhood. Everyone who met me would praise my beauty. I leaned in closer, my fingertips deliberately trailing up his arm, and asked in a low voice, "Then, do I look like my mother?" Marius froze instantly. As a grown man, he naturally understood that I was trying to seduce him. After a few stunned seconds, he abruptly pushed me away, frowning as he took a step back. "Eileen, do you realize what you're doing?" I know, drunk and feeling unbearably hot all over, I tilted my head up to look at him. "Marius, I like you." He froze for a long moment, then flicked his sleeve and walked away. "Nonsense." With those words, he turned and entered the room. The courage I had painstakingly gathered vanished in an instant. "Fooling around? How is this fooling around? Both unmarried, both willing. Isn't this simply a matter of mutual consent?" I returned sullenly to the guest bedroom at Marius's place. The next room was silent. Without the slightest movement, I waited and waited, but Marius never came to find me. I deliberately left the door open, didn't cover myself with the blanket, and fell asleep curled up in a ball. Yet when I woke again, it was Marius who roused me. Opening my eyes, I saw him sitting by the bed, his brow furrowed. "Get up and drink some medicine. You have a fever." "I have a fever. I do feel rather unwell, dizzy, blurry-eyed, and unbearably cold, pretending to have no strength." I wrapped my arms around Marius to sit up. I obediently took the fever-reducing medicine. I lay down. Marius tucked me in, then handed me a thermometer. "Take your temperature." I dutifully took it but deliberately pulled my collar down a bit in front of him, slipping the thermometer under my arm. The moment my collar was pulled down, Marius's breathing noticeably quickened before he abruptly turned his head away. I was indeed running a fever, 38.6 degrees Celsius, after my persistent pleading. Marius ultimately chose to stay and take care of me. In the dead of night, the alcohol's effects hadn't yet faded, precisely when dizziness sets in, cold, because of the fever. Even though I was covered with a blanket, I was still shivering from the cold. I grabbed his arm, closed my eyes, and muttered, "Cold." With my eyes closed, I reached out blindly and happened to grab his collar, pulling hard. Marius was caught off guard and was abruptly pulled down to face me. I opened my eyes, and the distance between us was mere inches. I could even feel his scorching breath. He was nervous. I could feel his breathing suddenly grow heavier. My heart skipped a beat, and emboldened by alcohol, I steeled myself and tilted my head up to kiss him. Late at night, a man and a woman alone together. The alcohol in my body completely surged at that moment, and suppressed emotions suddenly erupted, like dry wood meeting a blazing fire. With the wine taking effect, everything happened naturally. And then, we really slept together. When I woke up the next day, I lay naked in his arms. Marius was fast asleep. I held my breath, quietly watching his profile, afraid to wake him. Truth be told, it was more about fear of facing him. I didn't even know how to face this man. What would happen when he woke up? Will he be shocked? Will he be furious? Will he be filled with regret? I secretly wondered, when suddenly, Marius's eyelashes trembled slightly, and then, his eyes opened. I suddenly grew nervous, instinctively wanting to pretend to be asleep, but it was already too late. Marius opened his eyes and met my gaze. He froze for a moment, then abruptly sat up, his eyes filled with shock and an expression of utter disbelief. His reaction was far more intense than I had anticipated. Marius practically leaped out of bed, only to realize, perhaps having forgotten last night's passion, that he was completely naked, after knowing him for so many years. This was the first time I'd ever seen him wear such a flustered expression. He abruptly grabbed the clothes nearby and quickly put them on, then frowned as he looked down at me. "Eileen, last night," he spoke with difficulty, wearing the expression of someone who had done wrong. I interrupted him, lifting my face to meet his gaze. "Marius, will you take responsibility for me?" His body stiffened slightly, his lips trembling faintly, yet not a single word escaped him. I knew he wouldn't. I don't doubt Marius's character. Had it been another woman, he likely would have chosen to take responsibility in the end. But I was different. I am my mother's daughter, the biological child of the woman he loved for most of his life, which is why he finds it so hard to face me, but I truly love him. So even seeing him struggle fills me with reluctance, so I smiled and waved my hand with feigned nonchalance. "Forget it, I was just teasing you, no need to take responsibility." Yet Marius still wore that same expression, gazing at me with heartache and guilt. I managed to coax him out of the room under the pretense of needing some rest. I thought I'd be as carefree as my mother was in her youth. But in the end, I still couldn't measure up. As soon as the door closed, the tears began to fall. Sigh. I really thought that as long as two people were intimate, they'd definitely end up together. But I don't regret what happened last night, at least not now. I know the price of impulsive love. I've witnessed firsthand the hardships my mother endured raising me alone all these years. Yet perhaps I've inherited some of her temperament after all. When love comes, I'd walk through fire and water for it. But my mother is far more stubborn than I am. For someone she doesn't love, even if you tore your heart out and laid it before her, she'd just frown and say thank you. Marius, that's how it is. I knew he would never stand by my mother's side. Since that's the case, he's unmarried, I'm unattached. I refuse to believe I can't catch up to him eventually. Having resolved this in my mind, my mood lightened considerably. Glancing at the time, I got up, took a shower, changed clothes, then went downstairs to buy breakfast. From beginning to end, Marius never left his bedroom. I peeked through the doorway. The bedroom seemed unlit, utterly silent. After leaving breakfast on the dining table with a sticky note, I departed. A working stiff must rush back to the job first thing in the morning. No matter what happens, however, throughout the day, I remained absent-minded, with fragments of last night's scenes flashing sporadically through my mind. Due to the drunkenness, many details had already faded from memory, but occasionally, some blush-inducing moments would still resurface. I always had this premonition that things between Marius and me weren't truly over. Indeed, not many days later, my mother suddenly announced some news. She's in love. She said that uncle wanted to treat me and Marius to dinner, and I gladly agreed. For my sake, my mother remained single for so many years. Now that she's finally found a good man, of course I should support her. It's just that I'm still a little worried about Marius. That night, a somewhat famous private kitchen, inside a private dining room, after work, I changed my clothes and happily went to the appointment. But the moment I pushed open the door of the private room, I froze. My mom's new boyfriend was very enthusiastic, walking over to shake my hand with an air of warmth and caution. However, his appearance was quite different from what I had imagined. I had thought my mom would find a successful, elegant, and refined man, yet, standing before me was a burly, tattoo-covered gangster type. But the tough guy was looking at me with an ingratiating smile, the contrast somehow making him oddly endearing. As if sensing my confusion, my mother stepped forward and linked arms with the man, smiling at me. "This is your Noel. He's very kind and quite adorable." I nodded obediently and called out Uncle Noel, suddenly praised by my mom. This man who looked like a tough guy from the streets actually blushed instantly, then scratched his head in embarrassment. Just then, the private room door suddenly swung open. I quickly turned to look. It was Marius who had entered. The atmosphere instantly took on a subtle shift. Seeing the gangster-looking guy my mom was arm in arm with, Marius clearly froze for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure, walked over calmly, and nonchalantly shook hands with Noel. "Hello, Marius." Noel maintained his amiable smile, shook hands with Marius cordially, and exchanged a few pleasantries. "I've heard about you from Gina, that you've been taking good care of the mother and daughter." "Thank you." Marius had an indifferent expression, revealing nothing. "We've been friends for so many years, it's only natural." Then, the group took their seats. My mother naturally sat with Noel, while I deliberately chose to sit beside Marius. Marius was momentarily taken aback but didn't say anything. My mother was quite used to this since childhood. I'd always clung to Marius, insisting on sitting next to him at every meal. By the end of the meal, I could tell my mother was right. Though Noel looked somewhat intimidating at first glance, he was genuinely a good person. He was thoughtful, especially attentive to my mother, cheerful and quick-witted, always ready to play along with whatever she said, and even his unconscious gestures showed deep respect for others, including the restaurant staff. It was also evident that he loved my mother very much. By the end of the meal, my impression of him had changed significantly. However, the Marius beside me was quite silent, hardly speaking unless prompted. Watching the sweet couple across from us, the Marius next to me seemed even more forlorn. I pursed my lips, suddenly feeling a bit mischievous. Under the table, I gently brushed the top of his foot with my toes. Marius's body stiffened slightly in an instant, finding it amusing. I tilted slightly to the side, pretending to look out the window behind Marius, while letting my toes trail upward along his ankle. Marius's legs tensed, his body rigid, before his hand suddenly slipped beneath the table and gave my thigh a light slap. At the same time, the man frowned at me with an unmistakably strong warning in his eyes. I smiled, then firmly grabbed Marius's hand, forcefully intertwining our fingers. Marius's previously calm expression instantly became unsettled. The first half of the meal passed relatively peacefully, my mom and Noel occasionally being sweet, Marius remaining silent, while I happily played the role of a sugar-obsessed spectator. In the latter half, beneath the table where my mom and Noel couldn't see, I held hands with Marius. Marius later simply acquiesced to my behavior. As for why the two of us kept holding hands under the table without the other two noticing anything unusual, it was because I'm left-handed, and coincidentally sat to Marius's left side. My right hand held his left, and we occasionally took bites of food without anyone noticing anything amiss. Most importantly, the couple across from us were deeply in love, completely absorbed in each other, with no mind to spare for noticing us. But I quietly looked down at our hands, mine and Marius's, clasped together under the table, and for a moment, I was struck with sudden bewilderment. Do you think, maybe he's just doing this out of spite? Facing my mother's sudden boyfriend, was he shocked, sad, and lonely, and that's why he vengefully allowed my behavior? Thinking about it this way, I feel a bit heartbroken, but I don't want to dwell on it too much. I've liked him for far too long. As long as I can be with him, no matter his motives, I don't care. During the meal, the two across from us were full of affection, while Marius and I each had our own thoughts. Midway, Marius got up to go to the bathroom, and I stood up too. Pretending nothing was wrong, calling out in front of everyone, "Me too." Then I followed Marius out of the private room door as if nothing had happened. Marius walked quickly, and I trailed behind him, passing through a long corridor all the way to the bathroom entrance. Marius was about to enter the men's room when I suddenly grabbed him. I steeled myself and mustered the courage to lean in, whispering softly by his ear, "Marius, can I come to your place tonight?" 3. Marius was never one to handle teasing well, this much I knew. With just those words, in the empty space outside the restroom, Marius's ears turned crimson. He took a deep breath, turned to look at me with an earnest expression. "Eileen, let's end things here. I was drunk that day." Before he could finish, I suddenly interrupted. "Marius, even my mom has found a boyfriend. What are you still waiting for?" He froze. I stepped forward and took his hand. "Marius, ever since I was little, people have always said I look just like my mom. Look." I took his hand and placed it on my face, deliberately softening my tone. "Do I look like her?" Marius couldn't resist my insistence. He glanced down at me twice before averting his gaze again. "Do I or don't I?" He pressed his lips together tightly and only spoke after a long pause. "Yes." I seized the moment. "Then I'll come keep you company tonight." "Okay." As an adult, Marius certainly understood what those words meant. He remained silent for a long time before finally relenting. He looked into my eyes, his brow deeply furrowed. "All right." Receiving his affirmative response, I smiled and released his hand. "Go to the restroom. I'll wait here for you." Marius seemed to want to say something more, his lips parting slightly, but ultimately he remained silent and turned to enter the men's restroom. Yet the moment he turned away, my smile vanished completely. In truth, I knew better than anyone. Marius and I had already strayed onto divergent paths, with no way back. I'm betting my entire life on this. Yet, from the moment he agreed to let me come home and sleep with him tonight, it seems I was destined to lose completely. Frustrated by my thoughts, I lit a cigarette in the hallway outside the bathroom. Sometimes I think there's probably no hope left for me in this life. No education. At 20 years old I went to work in a factory, gave my all. Yet the one I love still doesn't love me. The cigarette had just burned a third of its length when Marius suddenly appeared, out of the corner of my eye. I saw him freeze for a moment before quickly stepping forward, snatching the cigarette from my hand with a sternness that almost made him seem like an elder. "No smoking." I looked up at him and blinked subtly. "My mom smokes too." Marius paused for a moment, glanced at me without saying a word, then naturally took the half-smoked cigarette from me and took 2 puffs before stubbing it out in a nearby trash bin. After tossing the cigarette butt, Marius looked down at me and said, "Let's go back. They'll start worrying if we take too long." I nodded and obediently followed behind Marius. All along the way, I kept staring at his back in a daze. Sometimes it's really hard to understand my mom's taste in men. Marius is such a great guy, yet she didn't like him, and ended up falling for some gangster type instead. Perhaps this is just how mysterious fate works between people. The rest of the dinner was uneventful. My mom and Noel continued being lovey-dovey. Marius remained his usual quiet self, while I kept my head down and silently shoveled rice into my mouth. The atmosphere was quiet, tinged with a hint of subtle awkwardness. Suddenly, a peeled shrimp appeared in the bowl before me. I froze for a moment, looking up in surprise, only to see Marius peeling a second one. Almost instinctively, I looked up at my mom and Noel sitting across from me, but their expressions showed nothing unusual. My mom even teased, "Marius, she's never been in a relationship before. If you spoil her like this, she might end up single forever." Holding out for someone who meets your standards, I quickly chimed in. Grinning as I looped my arm through Marius S and joked, well, if I can't find a boyfriend in the future, I'm just gonna stick with him then. My mom shot me a glare, scolding me with a laugh, no respect for your elders, to the two across from us. It was just a playful remark, nothing to take seriously. But only I knew. Marius S' fingers, peeling the shrimp, had stiffened for a long moment. After the meal, Noel went to pay the bill, only to find that Marius had already settled it. Looking at the bewildered Noel, Marius wore his first smile of the evening. It's just a meal, it doesn't matter who pays. From now on, please take good care of Gina. To be honest, Marius's words sounded somewhat inappropriate, like a formal entrustment. Fortunately, Noel, perhaps naturally oblivious, didn't dwell on the nuance. He just muttered about how Marius shouldn't have paid, while nodding and promising to take good care of his mom, watching the two of them being all lovey-dovey. I naturally chose not to be a third wheel. I waved my hand and said to my mom, you guys go ahead, I'll go back to the dorm tonight. With that, I pretended to be calm and patted Marius on the arm. Just let Marius drive me back. My mom nodded without saying much. Noel didn't have a car, whether he owned one or not. I had no idea. I know my mom, she wouldn't care about such things. If she set her mind on this person, Noel, even if he were to beg for food, she'd follow behind holding the bowl. He and my mother were like two love-struck children, hand in hand as they disappeared into the subway station. Only when their figures had completely vanished did I turn and take Marius' arm. Stop staring, Marius, let's go home. He responded softly, slowly withdrawing his gaze, allowing me to loop my arm through his as we turned toward the nearby parking lot. Drove home. On the way, sitting in the passenger seat, I suddenly had this illusion. It seems that I really am Marius' girlfriend now, sitting in the passenger seat beside him, heading home together in this evening light. The whole way, neither of us spoke a word. Parking, getting out, going home, closing the door behind us. Neither of us stepped inside first, nor turned on the lights. The door slammed shut behind me. Marius stood before me in silence. He seemed hesitant. I knew my mother finding a boyfriend had hit him hard. And I also knew he hadn't fully come to terms with what happened between us that night. But I didn't want to give myself time to hesitate. I feared that if I hesitated, I might truly lose my chance to stay by his side forever. So, in the dimness, I took a step forward and gently wrapped my arms around his waist. Above me, Marius' breathing grew heavier. Marius, I called softly in the night. Hold me. All these years, I had always called him by his name. Marius remained silent for a few seconds, then obediently wrapped his arms around me. His palms rested on my waist, scorching and feverish. I tilted my head up to look at him, then rose on tiptoe to press my lips against his. Marius' lips were incredibly soft, warm, and pillowy. I tentatively extended the tip of my tongue, tracing light circles on his lips. Marius paused for a moment before the hand on my waist suddenly tightened, pulling me into his embrace. Then, without warning, he scooped me up bridal style and carried me toward the bedroom. I clung tightly to his neck, knowing full well he was overcome with desire. In truth, I couldn't help but reflect, in the world of adults, that first step truly matters. Sometimes, once you've taken it, the second and third steps follow as naturally as breathing. Marius carried me into the bedroom and approached the bed, gently laying me down. He loosened his collar, looking at me by the moonlight from the window, his voice low, carrying a barely noticeable pant. Eileen, have you made up your mind? I didn't answer, but grabbed his hand and kissed him the moment he leaned down, using action to tell him the answer. When girls first awaken to love, they usually develop crushes on several boys one after another, but I never did. From the first stirrings of affection until now, I've only ever liked one person. Right now, he's holding my waist in this dimly lit room, pulling me tightly into his embrace. I dropped out of school and started working over 2 years ago. Many guys at the factory have pursued me, but I've never given any of them a chance, because I was waiting for someone to accept me. That night, we were exceptionally unrestrained. Marius held me tightly in his arms, and I responded to him with equal fervor. A night of indulgence. I know we can never turn back now, but the one thing I'm uncertain about is, Marius, whether he would actually give me a future. I still remember that late night when he hovered above me, our cheeks brushing as he whispered, Eileen, you're so beautiful, not I love you. At that moment, by the faint moonlight in the room, I quietly gazed into his eyes and barely restrained the urge to speak. Actually, at that moment I wanted to ask him, do I resemble her? I must be out of my mind to compare myself to my mother at a time like this, but no matter who that person is. The thought that he might still be thinking of someone else at this very moment makes my heart twist with indescribable bitterness. In the early morning hours, my phone suddenly rang. I opened my eyes, climbed out of Marius' arms, and pulled my phone from under the pillow. The screen clearly displayed 2 words, Mom. Beside me, Marius, who had glanced at the phone, instantly lost all drowsiness and abruptly sat up. Steadying myself, I answered the call. Hello. My mom's voice came through the phone, laced with laughter, the unmistakable sound of someone freshly nourished by love's embrace. Eileen, I'm at your factory gate. This morning Noel made your favorite century egg and lean pork congee, and I also bought some steamed pork buns. Come out and get them. The room was utterly silent. And even though I hadn't put the call on speakerphone, my mother's voice still drifted out faintly, clearly. Marius stiffened, I don't know why, but the moment I saw Marius looking like that, I just wanted to tease him. I tightened my grip on my phone and raised my voice. I'm not at the factory, I'm at Marius' place. Beside me, Marius reacted violently, suddenly standing up and staring at me with a shocked expression. Look, even the usually composed Marius is having such a nervous day for once. He looked exactly like a man caught in the act of adultery. My mom was also stunned. Why are you at his place? I smiled and glanced at Marius, meeting his warning gaze before curling my lips into a grin. My tone was casual as I said, I heard there's a new restaurant place downstairs that's amazing. I asked him to buy some for me, but he refused, so I had to come get them myself. My answer sounded natural, and my mom didn't suspect a thing after all. This was exactly the kind of thing I'd normally do. I once traveled an hour from the east side of the city to the west just to get a bite of thick-cut frozen yogurt, something my mom had long grown accustomed to. After Noel left her lovingly prepared breakfast at the factory gate's mailroom, she hung up the phone. I put away my phone and turned to look at Marius. Yet, his expression was far from pleasant. His face darkened unusually, his body stiffened straight. And he lowered his gaze to look at me. For a moment, I even felt a pang of unease under his gaze. Marius, I tugged at his wrist, gently swaying it, softening my voice to coo. To be honest, my mind was elsewhere. Last night had been too passionate, and after a quick wash, we simply went to bed. Marius only wore boxer shorts, his bare upper body revealing firm muscles, and I couldn't help stealing a few extra glances. Yet, my fingertips, which had climbed onto his arm, were quickly shaken off. After all these years, this was the first time I'd seen Marius angry. He gave me a cold glance, picked up the clothes scattered on the floor, and turned to leave the room. Bang! The door slammed shut with a heavy thud, making me shiver involuntarily as I snapped back to reality. Marius was genuinely angry. Just because I teased him a little earlier, I couldn't understand it, couldn't figure it out. Picking up the clothes tossed at the foot of the bed, I put them on and walked over to Marius' bedroom door, knocking lightly. Knock knock. The room remained silent, with no response. I pursed my lips and called out to him, Marius. He still refused to answer. I inexplicably got angry too, picked up my phone and turned to leave, deliberately slamming the door shut on my way out. A loud bang echoed behind me, yet my heart instantly sank to the bottom. Humans are truly strange creatures. Just before going to bed with Marius, I had told myself in my heart that I could ask for nothing, as long as I could stay by his side. But, after truly possessing something, one's mindset seems to undergo subtle, unconscious changes. When I reached the elevator, I turned back for a glance, but all was quiet behind me. Marius didn't even open the door to look. The elevator doors opened. I sighed and stepped inside. As I walked past Marius' building, I suddenly stopped and looked up at his window. Was it just my imagination? Or did I see a shadow flit past the window? I blinked, and when I looked again, the window was empty. All day at work, I couldn't muster any energy, my mind completely occupied by Marius' final glance at me. Was he really angry? I felt a pang of regret, then silently scolded myself for being so pathetic. Just when I was most irritated, someone had to come bothering me. The oblivious fellow was named Otto, a colleague from the same production line who'd been pursuing me for nearly 6 months. He was decent enough, just a bit too talkative. As luck would have it, though he'd taken leave today, I ran into him swaying near the factory gate, reeking of alcohol. Otto lumbered over to greet me. I gave a perfunctory nod, too preoccupied to linger, and walked straight out of the factory. I couldn't help but want to go to Marius' house to take a look. However, I had barely taken 2 steps when Otto grabbed my wrist. He moved closer, his breath reeking of strong alcohol, making me nauseous. Eileen, I've been simping for so long, shouldn't you give me some compensation today? I instantly got goosebumps all over and quickly shook off his hand, stepping back 2 paces. What kind of compensation do you want? This Otto, relying on his family ties with the factory director, who happens to be his uncle by marriage, has been getting away with all sorts of misconduct. The line managers usually turn a blind eye to his antics. At this moment, people kept streaming past the entrance, Yet they all chose to pretend not to see Otto harassing me. Otto must have been truly drunk, completely disregarding the stares from passers-by. With a lecherous grin, he quickened his pace toward me, raising his arm as if to grab me by the waist. I sidestepped his advance and, without a second thought, slapped him across the face. A sharp crack. Otto took a heavy slap to the face and stood frozen in place. I was stunned too, already in a foul mood today. When he teased me like that, before I even realized what was happening, my hand had already lashed out. Damn, slapped in public. Otto flushed instantly with rage, cursing. He grabbed my wrist with one hand while swinging at me without hesitation with the other. Then, just like in an idol drama, the scene unfolded. Otto had his arm grabbed, and in the next moment, he was violently thrown aside. I turned around in shock, just in time to meet Marius's gaze, his slightly elongated eyes, with their gentle curves, turned cold as they fell upon Otto. I stared at him blankly, instinctively raising my hand to reach for his arm, only to see him stride forward and grab Otto by the collar. After giving him a once-over, Marius chuckled darkly. A drunkard, and you dare lay hands on a woman? After being hit repeatedly, Otto felt deeply humiliated and struggled to get up to fight back, but was firmly pinned down by Marius. Marius has maintained a regular fitness routine for years. During intimate moments, I've traced each of his 8 well-defined abs, every one of them genuine. At the factory gate, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Marius intercepted Otto's slap meant for me and gave him a thorough scolding. For a moment, I was the center of attention. I've never been one to crave the spotlight, but the moment Marius appeared, a girlish flutter stirred unexpectedly in my heart. I longed to take his arm and parade him around the entire factory, letting everyone see, look. This is my man, so remarkable, childish, yet undeniably delightful. A minor farce finally concluded with Otto fleeing in panic. Marius withdrew his gaze and turned to look at me. He slightly furrowed his brows and explained in a low voice, I just happened to be passing by. I smiled cheerfully, linking my arm with his, casting all the morning's unpleasantness aside. Just happened to be passing by our factory gate right at my quitting time. Marius touched the tip of his nose and said nothing more. Under everyone's gaze, I took his arm and got into the car. Marius's black Land Rover was parked right at the factory gate, exceptionally eye-catching. Wow, I could already imagine the gossip I'd have to endure tomorrow morning. I'd bet anything that the factory folks would spread rumors about me being someone's kept woman. But, whatever, who cares? Today we sleep, tomorrow's troubles will keep. Along the way, Marius and I maintained a tacit understanding not to speak. In complete silence, we returned to his house. The door closed. Marius pulled me to sit on the sofa. He slightly lowered his gaze, crossing his hands on the coffee table, his fingertips gently rubbing against each other. From what I knew of him, he was making some kind of decision right now. This realization made me inexplicably uneasy. Sure enough, after a moment of silence, Marius suddenly looked up at me, his thin lips parting to utter the words I feared most. Eileen, we should probably end things here. My heart seemed to skip a beat. I took a deep breath, raised my head, and smiled at him. Why? Before Marius could speak, I grasped his hand first, my palm resting on the back of his hand, feeling nothing but coldness. Marius, I don't think you're the kind of scumbag who'd turn his back after getting what he wanted. Marius looked grave, as if he had made up his mind. He slowly raised his head, and under the overhead light, I could clearly see his eyes, bloodshot and weary. I suddenly felt a pang of heartache. I moved closer, leaning against his shoulder, not daring to look up at him again. Marius, don't end it here. I've loved you for so many years. Can feelings truly stop just because you say let's end it here? He remained silent, and the room was enveloped in complete stillness. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening slightly around his arm as my voice softened. As long as you're single, I'll keep being your lover, okay? I won't let anyone know about our relationship. I can hide it from my mom. I can, Eileen. He suddenly called out to me, interrupting my words. Pulling his arm away, he turned my body to face him and looked down at me. We've already made a mistake, we can't keep making more. I'm 15 years older than you. Putting aside all feelings, I'm your mother's friend. How could we possibly? Why couldn't we? I refused to back down and grabbed his hand again, though my voice trembled slightly. You and my mom are just friends. We're both unmarried, why couldn't we? He sighed, raised his hand, and gently tousled my hair. Eileen, you're young, you can afford to be immature, but I can't. But we've already slept together. I stared at him wide-eyed. Though I didn't want to pressure him with tears, my nose stung fiercely, and teardrops kept rolling down one after another. Marius has always been afraid of my tears. All these years, no matter the situation, the moment my tears fell, he would immediately compromise. Because of this, my mother once teased him, saying he would surely become a doting father to daughters in the future. He bent down to wipe my tears, his brow tightly furrowed, eyes filled with heartache and regret. The crimson in them making him look exceptionally haggard. I guess he truly regretted it. Wiping away his tears, Marius sighed softly. I've wronged you. I shook my head. I did it all willingly back then. But suddenly he crouched down, reached out to touch my face, and said in a low voice, I took your first time, yet cowered from responsibility. Eileen, tell me why I'm such a coward. I fell silent for a moment, unsure how to respond to that. But I knew Marius wasn't cowardly. He was the bravest man I'd ever met. He sighed again. Suddenly, he raised his hand to the back of my head and pulled me into his embrace with a slight tug. Warm lips descended upon me. After that butterfly-light kiss, Marius gently cradled my face in his hands. I'll take responsibility. I froze, then coming to my senses, looked at him with overwhelming joy. You mean? He pulled me tightly into his embrace, pressed against his chest. I couldn't see the expression on his face. I'll take you to see your mother tomorrow morning. That night, I stayed over at Marius's place again. I wore his pajamas and shared his bed, yet this time nothing happened between us. We slept clothed, holding each other in our arms. In the darkened room, I lay on my side, tightly wrapping my arms around Marius's waist. Everything came too suddenly. I needed to keep reassuring myself, confirming that I truly had him, but I seemed to have become apprehensive about gains and losses. Even though he was lying right beside me at this very moment, I still felt an inexplicable emptiness in my heart, with nowhere to settle. I'm afraid his words about being together were just a momentary impulse. I'm afraid he'll back out tomorrow because of my mother's fury. I'm afraid, I worry too much. But when it all comes down to it, there's really only one thing I'm afraid of, afraid that he won't want me. Late at night, half asleep, I instinctively reached out to the side, only to find the space beside me empty. I jolted awake in an instant. Sitting up, I glanced around the room, and only when I saw the figure standing by the window did my heart slowly settle. Hearing the movement, Marius turned to look at me. Why are you awake? His tone was as gentle as ever, but to my surprise, I noticed a half-smoked cigarette pinched between his fingers. In my memory, he rarely smoked. Apart from that half-cigarette he snatched from me at the restroom entrance last time, I hadn't seen him smoke for what seemed like a year or two. Marius stubbed out the cigarette and walked to the bedside, pulling the coat draped over the chair and placing it over my shoulders with practiced ease. Suddenly I grabbed his hand. Marius, I had a nightmare. Marius seemed to smile as he patted my shoulder and comforted me softly. It's all right. Dreams are the opposite of reality. I looked up at him. He stood against the light, and in the dimness, I couldn't make out the expression on his face. Marius, I dreamed that you didn't want me anymore. Marius paused for a moment before patting my back again. His voice soft. It could also be the opposite, that you might be the one leaving me. Just listening to this exchange, for a fleeting moment, I almost believed we were truly a couple. A pair of ordinary yet deeply in love, unremarkable lovers. Yet, inhaling the scent of tobacco on his clothes, my words still slipped out uncontrollably. Marius, if I weren't her daughter, would you have fallen in love with me? Marius's fingers momentarily stiffened. In the night, he seemed to purse his lips slightly. After a long silence, Marius reached out to tousle my hair, his voice very soft. Probably. The word probably was followed by another. I once read in a psychology book that when a sentence ends with the modal particle, it usually means the speaker doesn't truly mean what they're saying. Stay for lunch before you go actually means they don't want you to stay for lunch. I'll pay the bill, which really means I don't want to pay. Probably, might mean no, or perhaps he himself doesn't know the answer behind that assumption. Marius, I called out to him in a soft voice, my fingertips lightly lifting to hook onto the collar of his pajamas. As a grown man, and an older one at that, Marius instantly understood the meaning behind my call. Under the moonlight, he tensed his jaw and reached out once more to tousle the hair atop my head, but I tilted away to avoid his touch. I frowned, rarely showing my displeasure in front of him. Marius, this gesture of yours is too much like an elder doting on a child. Marius paused, seemingly about to speak, but I cut him off. I grabbed his hand and pulled it to rest at my waist. His originally cool hand inexplicably ignited a wave of heat the moment it settled on my waist. I leaned in close, blowing a warm breath by his ear. This is how a man should treat a woman. Marius's breathing noticeably grew heavier. After a long pause, he finally pulled me into his embrace. In the darkness, a soft sigh sounded above my head. Eileen, what am I to do with you? He sighed softly, his words filled with resignation. I wrapped my arms around his neck and fell onto the bed. The moment he leaned over me, I knew neither of us could pull away anymore. I'm no good. I fell for my mother's friend, hopelessly in love with a man 15 years my senior, and indulged myself in staying by his side, but Marius wasn't any better. Knowing full well he shouldn't, he still let his guard down every time. I know that Marius is infatuated with my body, but he doesn't love me, it doesn't matter. I'm willing to wait until the day he loves me, life is long, and I refuse to believe his heart can truly remain as unyielding as stone, never to waver. Marius, there's plenty of time ahead, we'll take it slow. The next morning, when I woke up, the other side of the bed was already empty. I calmly got up, washed up, and got dressed, because I knew that Marius always keeps his word. Since he promised to take responsibility for me, he would never abandon me, at least, not before meeting my mother. Sure enough, as soon as I stepped out of the bedroom, I saw him sitting at the dining table. Marius was wearing a simple white t-shirt today. Standing against the light, hearing the sound, he turned around, still holding a spatula in his hand. "You're awake, come eat," he said softly, pouring me another cup of hot milk. I didn't respond, stepping forward to wrap my arms around his waist, pressing my head against his back, suddenly feeling an inexplicable sense of peace. "Marius, have you made up your mind?" A night had passed, and he seemed in much better spirits. As he made sandwiches for me, he asked gently, "Made up my mind about what?" My arms around his waist tightened slightly without conscious thought. "Later, come with me to see my mom." His movements paused for 2 seconds before resuming as usual. "Yeah," he responded, handing me the finished sandwich. "Don't worry, I promised I'd take responsibility for you." As he spoke, Marius subconsciously raised his hand to ruffle my hair, but paused mid-air as if remembering something. He chuckled lightly. "Eat up." I took the sandwich and bit into it, all the while endlessly fantasizing in my mind about what would happen next. Fortunately, Mom now has Noel by her side, otherwise, I'd really be worried she might not handle it well. After breakfast, Marius picked up a napkin to wipe the corners of his mouth, paused for a few seconds, then reached for the phone on the table. My heart suddenly raced, skipping a beat. Under my watchful gaze, Marius dialed my mom's number. "Hey," the call connected. Marius took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "Let's meet later, just you, me, and Eileen." On the other end of the line, my mom seemed to agree readily. After just 2 sentences, Marius hung up the phone. "Let's go." He was lost in thought for a moment, then looked down at me. I don't know why, but at this moment, the one who suddenly hesitated was me. I'm not afraid of my mother's scolding. What I fear is, if Marius is with me now out of obligation, what if he regrets it later? Looking back in the future, would he blame or resent me? In my moment of hesitation, the back of my hand suddenly warmed. It was Marius holding my hand. His palm was large enough to completely envelop my hand. "Let's go, to your place." I nodded in surprise and followed him as we stood to leave. The whole way, we remained silent as before, neither of us speaking. At the doorstep, looking at the all-too-familiar door before me, I suddenly hesitated, and the fingers tightly intertwined with Marius' loosened slightly. Truth be told, I could sense that even the usually resolute Marius had wavered a little the moment we reached the doorstep. His palm was damp with a thin layer of sweat, his fingertips stiffer than usual. We stood at the door for a long while, yet neither of us made the first move to knock. I hesitated for a long time. Even backing out at the last moment, I tugged at his hand and looked up at him, just about to say forget it when suddenly the door swung open. There stood my mother at the doorway, while Marius and I, completely unprepared, appeared before her hand in hand. The three of us stood there, staring at each other. My mother glanced at us, then slowly lowered her gaze until it settled on our tightly interlaced fingers, mine and Marius's. Silence, a deathly silence. I don't know why I felt hesitant and nervous before opening the door, but at this moment, I instead had a thought akin to throwing caution to the wind. I tightly grasped Marius' hand, drawing some warmth from his palm. Marius' fingers were terribly stiff, yet he didn't let go of my hand either. A few minutes passed. Just when I thought my mother would fly into a rage, would become hysterical, she suddenly released her grip on the doorknob, stepped aside, and made way. "Come in." She took a few minutes to digest the matter. Now, there was only calm on her face. I couldn't even detect a trace of excess emotion. I bit my lip and walked in, holding Marius' hand. After closing the door, suddenly, a voice came from the kitchen. "The fish is almost done stewing. When will Eileen and the others be back?" As soon as the words fell, Noel poked his head out from the kitchen. Seeing me and Marius, he froze for a moment before smiling and about to speak. But his gaze suddenly stopped on our tightly clasped hands. His smile stiffened slightly. Compared to my mother's calm demeanor, he was the one with more emotional fluctuations. His tattooed arm trembled as he pointed at me and Marius, while Noel looked utterly stunned. "You too." Before he could finish, my mother patted his shoulder. "Noel, go cook first, I'm hungry." Noel suppressed the shock in his eyes, nodded, and returned to the kitchen wearing an apron. Closing the kitchen door behind him, the three of us sat on the sofa, the atmosphere somewhat awkward. The first to speak was my mother. I knew she had always been an exceptionally bold woman, though she usually wore a faint smile and would often choose to laugh things off. But I knew she was truly formidable, not just in matters of love, but in everything she did. She stood up, came over, and sat beside me, gripping my hand tightly. I don't know why, but the moment I held her hand, I suddenly realized, this woman who had sheltered me from life's storms for half my lifetime was no longer young. She looked at me quietly, still composed. Eileen, you're an adult now. Mom just wants to ask you one thing. Do you truly love him, no matter what happens in the future? Will you weather every storm together and walk hand in hand through life? This passage sounded just like wedding vows. I froze for a couple of seconds, then nodded with unwavering determination. Marius, I can't be certain what was thinking, but I was definitely the unwavering one. Seeing me nod, my mother didn't say anything, just patted the back of my hand and stood up. Marius, come inside with me for a moment. She lowered her eyes, glanced at Marius, her tone light. Betraying neither joy nor anger, Marius stood up, and the two of them walked into the adjacent room, the door closing behind them. My heart was racing with both excitement and fear. The excitement came from my mother's unexpected calmness. She had agreed without hesitation. The fear was, if she said something, Marius might change his mind. I wanted to sneak over and eavesdrop by the door, but just as I stood up, the kitchen door swung open. Noel placed a plate of sliced fruit in front of me. Smiling so amiably it almost seemed kind. Have some fruit. I had no choice but to sit back down, spearing a piece of apple and handing it to me. Noel whispered, actually, your mother has suspected for a while now. I froze, looking up in astonishment. She had said long ago that you must like Marius. I didn't believe it at first, always thinking there was a generational gap between you two. He's 15 years older than you. How could you possibly be together? But your mother insisted, saying she understood you, that she knew what the look in your eyes when you gazed at Marius meant. I was utterly stunned. If she knew, then, why has my mother never mentioned, let alone strictly controlled my contact with Marius? As if guessing my confusion, Noel whispered, she said you're exactly like her when she was young. Most people won't stop until they hit a wall, but you two are the type who, once set on something, would keep charging even after breaking through that wall. Never giving up. After a pause, he handed me the fork with an apple on it. Your mother said if she tried to stop you, it would only make you more determined to be with him. I took the apple, but couldn't snap out of my daze for the longest time. In my trance, I recalled so many details from the past that I'd never paid attention to before. For instance, she would often unconsciously remind me that I was grown up now and should keep my distance from Marius. She would also earnestly tell me how she had been too young back then, had suffered the pitfalls of love, and thus had half her life ruined because of it, or how she had once advised me that when I started dating, it'd be best to find someone around my own age. They didn't need to be wealthy or accomplished young. The most important thing was that we loved each other. She said, at my mother's age, I no longer believe in the saying that love can quench thirst. But I still hope you'll find someone to spend your life with who loves you as much as you love them. It won't work if only he loves you, nor if you love him too much. These words I once paid no mind to suddenly echoed in my ears, and I finally understood what she had meant back then, as I stood there lost in thought. The bedroom door suddenly opened, and my mother walked out followed by Marius. Marius walked behind with a slightly lowered gaze. A faint red mark barely visible on his left cheek, as if he'd been slapped. I froze for a moment before abruptly standing up and striding toward him, reaching out to touch his face, but Marius tilted his head slightly to avoid my hand. He grasped my hand. It's nothing. Throughout it all, my mother maintained her composed expression. She glanced at Noel and asked calmly, is dinner ready? Noel nodded quickly. It's ready. I'll go serve the rice. No need. Marius cut him off, whispering, I'll take Eileen home first. With that, he glanced at my mother, took my hand, and turned to leave. I was momentarily dazed, yet still followed closely behind him. Marius. My mother's voice came from behind. Marius stopped in his tracks but didn't turn around. When I looked back, I realized my mother's eyes had quietly reddened at some point. Her eyes reddened, her hands hanging at her sides clenched into tight fists. If you dare betray my daughter, I'll haunt you even as a ghost. You know I mean what I say. This might be the first time I've ever seen my mother shed tears since the day I was born. Exaggerated. A woman, a single mother who had been alone for 20 years, hadn't shed a single tear in front of her closest daughter throughout those 2 decades. She was so strong that it made me feel as though she was a woman who could never be hurt. Yet, even though she quickly accepted the news of Marius and me being together and remained composed, her reddened eyes still betrayed her worry and heartache. Marius didn't respond, pausing slightly before nodding and then leading me away by the hand. On the way back, Marius remained silent, his body rigidly straight as he drove quietly. I sat in the passenger seat, staring at him in a daze. I got what I wanted, I was really with Marius now. But everything seemed far less perfect than I had imagined. At the very least, Marius seemed to have grown silent, which wasn't like him before. He was the type who radiated youthful charm. Even at 35, he adored white shirts, kept his black hair neatly trimmed just above his forehead, and smiled often, a gentle, refined sort of smile. But these past 2 days, he'd clearly become much more withdrawn. Every time I saw him, he was lost in silent contemplation. Yet what exactly he was thinking about, I couldn't say. That night, I slept in Marius's embrace. Isn't it strange, now that we're really together, we've stopped being physically intimate. Instead, we just sleep in each other's arms wearing pajamas. Not exactly an embrace, more like me wrapping my arms around his waist. Perhaps because I've felt so insecure in this relationship, I've suddenly developed a habit. When sleeping, I must hold onto his waist, with my fingertips clutching the hem of his clothes. Perhaps it was the subconscious fear that he might leave. At night, unable to sleep, I looked up and just happened to see Marius also lying awake. Marius, I reached out and poked his chest. Do you love me? He paused for a moment, then turned slightly to tuck the blanket around me before leaning down to place a gentle kiss on my forehead. Go to sleep now, don't overthink it, I'll always be here with you. His tone was gentle. Yet his words pierced straight to the heart. He would always stay with me, just not out of love. But I knew it was my own fault for asking such a sentimental question in the dead of night when emotions override reason, especially when I already knew the answer, so I didn't press further, instead tightening my arms around him slightly. All right, good night, good night. The next morning, when I woke up, Marius had already prepared breakfast, still my favorite flavors, after all these years. He knew my preferences inside out, like drinking soy milk without sugar, eating meat without ginger in the filling, and even steaming the yellow-fleshed sweet potatoes I love. Everything seemed impeccable. He was attentive and gentle in catering to my preferences. After breakfast, Marius drove me to work. The car stopped at the factory gate. Marius leaned over to unbuckle my seatbelt. I tilted my face up slightly. Goodbye kiss. He paused for 2 seconds, then leaned in and gently kissed my cheek. I felt a little disappointed but said nothing, instead taking the initiative to steal a quick kiss on his lips before opening the door to get out. But, just as I'd anticipated yesterday, the moment I stepped out of the car, I instantly drew a crowd of gazes, and murmurs began to rise around me. I had long prepared myself to endure all of this, straightening my back as I walked in, yet, I still underestimated how gossipy these people could be, despite having mentally prepared myself. By the end of the day I still couldn't help but get into 3 arguments, one of which nearly turned physical. What annoyed me most, however, was Otto. I thought this guy would tone it down after getting beaten up yesterday, but instead he became even more aggressive, harassing me off and on throughout the day. It was beyond annoying. Finally, at lunch break, Otto started flirting with me in the cafeteria and tried to cop a feel. I raised my hand and slapped him twice, then turned and walked away before he could react. I went straight to hand in my resignation letter, packed up my things simply, and left the factory. Finding a job always takes time, so I carried my belongings back to Marius's place. At this hour, he was still at work. Looking at Marius's empty home, I suddenly felt inspired to slowly decorate our future home together. Marius, this person, has always preferred minimalist style, apart from essential furniture. There are no superfluous items in the house, making the entire space feel empty and devoid of any lived-in atmosphere. I checked the time, went to a nearby supermarket to buy some groceries, and prepared to cook at home. However, when I returned home carrying a pile of meat and vegetables, I saw someone at Marius's doorstep, a signature long dress paired with high heels, fiery red lips, a figure good enough, though the face left something to be desired. This person is no stranger to me, Hilda. Marius's rumored girlfriend. The reason I say rumored is because she has repeatedly followed Marius around at various occasions, but Marius has never acknowledged their relationship. I've seen this person a few times before, at Marius's company and also at my mom's class reunions. When she saw me, Hilda paused briefly, a flicker of displeasure flashing through her eyes before she quickly concealed it. Of course I knew why she was displeased. The man she loved had been deeply in love with my mother for so many years. It would be strange if she were happy to see me. However, she hid it well. The displeasure in her eyes vanished in an instant. She smiled, waved at me, and spoke in a tone one might use to coax a little girl. Eileen, what are you doing here? I glanced at her, holding a shopping bag in one hand while fishing out my keys to knock on the door. I live here now. Hilda paused for a moment, then said with a smile, Is your mother away from home recently? Why are you staying here? Not just staying, I interrupted her, opening the door. From now on, I'll be living here with Marius. Hilda was completely stunned. You too. I looked at her and finished her sentence with a declaration. We're now boyfriend and girlfriend. After the words boyfriend and girlfriend slipped out, Hilda clearly froze. I stood inside the door watching her quietly, expecting shock or sadness, but never did I imagine this usually cold and elegant woman could be so sharp-tongued in private. She only hesitated for a few seconds before instantly changing her expression, sizing me up with disdain. Boyfriend and girlfriend. I stiffened, then frowned. What do you mean by that? What do you mean? The woman in her 30s sneered, pushed the door open, and walked straight in, her eyes scanning the room with a mocking tone. Your mother was a shameless bitch. But I never thought you'd outdo her. Barely 20 and already trying to seduce a man old enough to be your uncle. Eileen, compared to your mother, you've truly surpassed the master. I smirked, tightening my grip on the phone. Whether Marius and I are dating or not, what's it to you? As for you, I gave her a once-over. Auntie, at your age, you really shouldn't be competing with me for a man. Besides, Marius prefers them young. You're not his type. As I spoke, I waved my phone, showing the WeChat chat interface between me and Marius. The exact words Hilda had just said were recorded and sent over without alteration. After Hilda got a clear look at the phone, I shrugged. Auntie, did you enjoy your little rant just now? Hilda's face instantly changed. Everyone knows my mom is Marius's bottom line. After being cursed out like that by her, it's easy to imagine how Marius would react. Her face turned cold. You bitch. After cursing, she seemed unable to contain her anger and rushed over in her high heels, raising her hand to grab my hair. Sorry, but I'm not some pushover. Back in school, I didn't study much, but I sure got into plenty of fights. My mom was constantly being called in by the teachers because of it. When someone throws the first punch, I certainly won't hold back. And, at the moment she rushed over, my phone screen suddenly lit up. I quickly glanced at it and happened to see Marius's message. No need to be polite, I'll be right back. I smiled. Marius really does understand me. Marius soon hurried back. By the time he arrived, Hilda and I had already fought our way from inside the house to outside. In the hallway, Hilda and I were pulling at each other's collars and hair, both looking disheveled and every bit the image of shrews. Of course, Hilda was in worse shape, her face was scratched, and she'd lost one of her high heels, limping awkwardly as she moved. Marius quickly stepped forward and pulled us apart. Marius, Hilda, Marius, Hilda, Marius, Marius. I winked at him as I spoke, playing the weakling, who couldn't do that. Caught between us, Marius made his choice without hesitation. He raised his hand, pulling me into his embrace, tucking the stray hairs at my temple behind my ear before saying coolly, then hit back. Hilda was completely stunned, looking utterly incredulous. Marius, I smiled and nestled into Marius's arms. Forget it. After all, she's of the auntie generation, how could I possibly lay hands on her? I spoke with a beaming smile, deliberately emphasizing the word auntie with extra weight. Hilda looked displeased, but with Marius present, she didn't dare say much. Marius showed her no courtesy whatsoever. His palm slid slightly downward, settling at my waist as he guided me inside. With a loud bang, the door slammed shut, leaving Hilda completely outside. Once inside, Marius released his hold and scrutinized me carefully with lowered eyes. Only after confirming I was unharmed did he finally let out a sigh of relief. He raised his hand to tousle my hair. Marius, his tone slightly stern, as if displeased. You're too old to be getting into fights. From now on, wait for me to handle things when I'm back, understand? I nodded, puffing out my cheeks without saying a word. Then, his voice reached my ears again. Eileen, I'll protect you. The sudden tenderness caught me off guard, and I froze for a moment before looking up at him. Marius stood at the doorway, with a clear blue sky outside the window. This scene inexplicably touched my heart, that heart already filled with Marius, and it instantly softened. I nodded, poking his chest with my finger, and inexplicably felt my nose tingling with emotion. Fine, I'll remember those words. Marius, if you ever hurt me, I'll kill you and feed your heart to the dogs. Marius was amused by me, his hand resting on my head, pressing down slightly harder. All right, laughing, I grabbed his hand, interrupting this characteristically paternal gesture. I believed him when he said those words, he would protect me, but as for how much of that was due to affection and how much was for my mother's sake, that was something I couldn't care less about now. Isn't there a saying that goes, to have someone means to have them by your side? At the very least, I now have Marius by my side. In the evening, I still couldn't get into the kitchen. Marius tied on an apron and went to cook for me. I took an ice cream from the fridge and leaned against the doorframe, eating it while staring absent-mindedly at his back. Even after knowing Marius for so many years, every time I see him, I can't help but marvel at how such a perfect man could exist in this world. Handsome, wealthy, knowledgeable, cultured, thoughtful and gentle, and even his cooking is delicious. Apart from not loving me, I really can't find a single flaw in Marius. I took a bite of my ice cream, tilted my head to look at him, and mischievously thought, Marius loves my mom. And I carry my mom's blood in my veins, so by extension, Marius loves me. The thought made me burst out laughing. Hearing the sound, Marius turned to glance at me. What are you thinking about that's making you so happy? As he finished speaking, the moment he caught sight of the ice cream in my hand, the man suddenly stiffened his expression, snatched it away from me, and frowned. No cold treats during your period, right? I suddenly remembered my period had arrived unexpectedly this morning when I left for work. Shooting me a reproachful glare, Marius grabbed the ice cream and took a bite himself. His expression and movements were utterly natural, showing not the slightest distaste for the half-melted ice cream I'd already bitten into. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him quietly. Sweet. Marius seemed momentarily stunned by my question, then nodded. I took a step forward, stood on tiptoe, and lightly kissed the corner of his lips. Stepping back, I licked the corner of my mouth and smiled. It is quite sweet. Who would believe that because of this impulsive flirtation of mine, Marius, this old man in his 30s, actually showed faint signs of blushing at the tips of his ears. He pursed his lips, finished the ice cream in a few bites, then turned back to cook. Marius was always efficient in his tasks. Before long, 3 dishes and a soup were laid out on the table. When it came to food and drink, he never settled for less. Even when dining alone, he would prepare at least 1 dish and a soup. However, despite coming from a well-off family, Marius refused to hire a housekeeper. When I asked him why, he simply replied with 3 words: not used to it, unaccustomed to others intruding into his life, unaccustomed to the presence of strangers in his typically minimalist existence. Actually, I'd quite like to ask him, what does it feel like for him to suddenly have me blending into his life like this? At the dining table, Marius put on disposable gloves and began peeling shrimp for me. Today's menu was all my favorites: braised shrimp, garlic sautéed lettuce, sweet and sour spare ribs, and a bowl of loofah soup. Marius. I took a bite of the spare ribs and looked up at him. I quit my job. Marius didn't react at all, not even lifting his head. It's fine, I'll take care of you. The words "I'll take care of you" were spoken by him with such calmness. Of course, I had no doubt about his financial capability, but to my ears, it sounded more like a promise, inexplicably sweet. As he peeled shrimp and placed them in my bowl, Marius suddenly took out his wallet, pulled out a bank card, placed it on the table, and pushed it towards me. I looked up from gnawing on a rib. What's this? My card. From now on, you can spend as you please. Wow. I was instantly Marius impressed by this domineering CEO demeanor of his. Of course, I didn't stand on ceremony either and directly pocketed the card. Anyway, I've never bothered with formalities with him since we were kids. I glanced at the wallet he'd left on the table, picked it up for a look. It was stuffed with a thick wad of cash. I gave it a squeeze. Everyone uses mobile payments these days. Why are you still carrying so much cash? He dropped a piece of greens into my bowl. I'm not used to mobile payments. As soon as the words left his mouth, he seemed to remember something. His hand holding the chopsticks froze. Then he suddenly reached over to snatch the wallet back, but it was already too late. I still caught a glimpse of the photo tucked in the wallet's inner layer. The person in that photo was someone I knew down to my very bones. Silence. A deathly silence fell. Marius pressed his lips together, his voice slightly strained. Eileen, this shrimp is quite delicious. Have a piece too. I snapped out of my thoughts, cutting off his attempt to explain, then quickly closed the wallet and put it back on the table, picking up my chopsticks to serve him a shrimp in passing. What does it matter? I comforted myself inwardly. I'd known this all along. Besides, everything was my own choice. To be honest, it wasn't just this photo in the wallet. I'd even prepared myself for the possibility of him calling out that name during intimate moments in bed. I took a bite of the pork rib and thought resentfully, people, especially someone like me, can't help but act foolish when it comes to matters of the heart. And so, Marius and I officially started living together. After quitting my job, I settled comfortably at home for a while, going out daily to shop, buy clothes, and swipe Marius' card. Then I'd buy groceries, wreak havoc in the kitchen to whip up a couple of barely edible dishes, and set them on the table, waiting for Marius to come home from work so we could eat together. All in all, to sum it up, our life together is quite harmonious. Marius is truly the perfect boyfriend, attentive, caring for my every need, and sensitive to every emotional nuance of mine. As a boyfriend, he's practically flawless, except for one thing: he doesn't love me. However, I'm gradually suppressing the possessiveness in my heart, little by little convincing myself it's not like I just found out he doesn't love me. From the moment we got together, I was prepared for his lack of love. Yet, no matter how comfortable life at home is, it ultimately carries a certain dullness. Lately, I've started preparing to look for a job again, but with my low education and no remarkable skills to speak of, finding a decent job won't be easy. 6 p.m. I had been lounging on the sofa watching TV all afternoon out of boredom. Just as I was about to start cooking, Marius suddenly called. Hello, I answered, pacing around the balcony with my phone pressed to my ear as Marius's voice came through. Eileen, I have a business dinner tonight and won't be back for dinner. I ordered takeout for you, your favorite Japanese food. Resting my chin on one hand, I tentatively asked, Marius, can I come with you? Marius fell silent for a moment before whispering, be good, this is a business meeting, it's not appropriate, but I was truly bored out of my mind, so I wheedled and pleaded with him a little more. Marius has always been soft-hearted and can never resist my persistent begging. Sure enough, after being pestered for a while, he relented. All right then, I'll come back to pick you up now, but you mustn't speak out of turn later. Mission accomplished, I promise. After hanging up the phone, I rushed to change my clothes, quickly applied some light makeup, and then went downstairs to wait for Marius. He was quick too. Before long, the familiar black Land Rover pulled up by the roadside. I got in and buckled up, deliberately smoothing my skirt before looking up at him. How do I look in this outfit today? Marius gave me a thorough once-over, then nodded. You look beautiful. This is one of the things I particularly love about Marius. He never half-heartedly dismisses anything. He wouldn't just glance casually and say it looks nice. Instead, he would examine it carefully and then genuinely appreciate it. Receiving his approval, I happily leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. Marius let out a heavier breath but didn't pull away. Over this period, my relationship with Marius has grown much closer. Gradually, he's started to actively hold me tenderly after work. Forget about love for now, at the very least. He might have completely grown accustomed to my presence by now. The ride passed in silence, with the car playing the soothing music that Marius liked, while I kept my head down scrolling through my phone. Soon, the car pulled into the parking lot of a hotel. Holding onto Marius's arm, I followed him into the hotel's private dining room. Within minutes, everyone had arrived. Besides Marius, there were 3 other businessmen in the room, each accompanied by a beautiful young woman. One of the middle-aged men in a blue shirt had his eyes light up the moment he saw me. Everyone took their seats, and of course, I sat beside Marius, while the middle-aged man in the blue shirt took the seat next to me. Mr. Marius, this is. After a round of drinks, he raised his glass and asked politely. Marius glanced at me and was about to respond when I cut in first. I can hold my liquor quite well, so Mr. Marius made sure I'd be here today to keep the bosses company and drink to their heart's content. Not that I was playing any petty tricks, I answered that way simply because I was worried people might think it disrespectful for him to bring his little girlfriend along to a business discussion. Yet, I never imagined that my spur-of-the-moment reply would end up causing trouble instead. At first, things were fine. The atmosphere remained harmonious as I listened quietly on the side. Toasting when it was time to toast and drinking when it was time to drink. From the sound of it, Marius seemed to be closing the deal quite smoothly, until, after several rounds of drinks, the older man sitting beside me, wearing a blue shirt and old enough to be my father, got drunk. As the saying goes, liquor emboldens the timid, let alone these big bosses who were never timid to begin with. He set down his glass, gave Marius a meaningful look, then placed his thick, greasy hand on mine, rubbing it in a particularly nauseating way as he said with heavy implication, Mr. Marius, I'm especially happy today. Let's collaborate more in the future. I froze, abruptly withdrawing my hand and instinctively moving closer to Marius. The atmosphere instantly grew tense. The middle-aged man in the blue shirt seemed displeased, shooting me a glare before looking up at Marius. Mr. Marius, I came here with sincere intentions to collaborate with your company. As he spoke, he casually raised his hand and rested it on my waist, apparently convinced that Marius wouldn't jeopardize this business deal over a mere hostess subordinate. Marius lowered his gaze, and when it landed on my waist, his eyes instantly darkened. I slapped his hand away. Marius wrapped his arm around me and stood up. Sorry, we're no longer interested in this deal. Without another word of explanation, Marius grabbed me and turned to leave. Behind us, the man in the blue shirt called out, Mr. Marius, what's the meaning of this? We can discuss the deal further. Surely you're not doing this just for a woman. Marius stopped in his tracks, turned to glance at him, and rested his palm on my waist. This is my girlfriend. With that, he didn't even give anyone time to react, wrapping an arm around my waist and heading straight out the door. The whole way, knowing I'd caused trouble, I didn't dare breathe too loudly. Following carefully behind him, until we got in the car. As the door closed, I glanced at his expression and said quietly, maybe I should go home first, and you two can talk properly. No need, Marius responded quickly, and from what I could see, there was no displeasure on his face. Starting the car, Marius said calmly, "It was always meant to be a banquet with hidden daggers. They had this deal planned long ago, and I have other potential partners in mind. Tonight was just about both sides feeling each other out." Marius's words weren't particularly profound, but to be honest, I didn't fully understand them. Who was collaborating with whom? What exactly they were feeling out? Marius didn't elaborate, and even if he had, I probably wouldn't have grasped it. I only know that, no matter what, I might have caused him trouble today. "Go home." I changed into slippers and obediently sat on the sofa, while Marius went straight to the kitchen. A moment later, he walked out slowly, holding a cup of warm milk, handing the milk to me. Marius ruffled my hair, a gesture that seemed to be becoming his signature habit. "Don't overthink it, drink some milk and go to sleep." I nodded, wanting to apologize but unsure how to begin. That night, Marius never once mentioned what happened at the dinner table, nor did he utter a single word of reproach. But from that day on, he seemed to become even busier. Our life together was warm and harmonious. Quite vibrant in its own way. I stopped rushing to find a job, settling down peacefully at home, sleeping until noon, then getting up for meals, going shopping for beauty treatments, and buying groceries before returning. My cooking skills improved remarkably, gradually earning Marius's approval. It wasn't just in daily life, our intimacy in bed also grew increasingly harmonious. Marius gradually let his guard down. He would hold me close in the dead of night, whispering sweet nothings, and even introduced some creativity into our intimate moments. In short, he now seems to be slowly accepting me, truly treating me as his other half, just as I had imagined in the past. Marius is the perfect boyfriend through and through. The daily grind hasn't diminished my love for him in the slightest. On the contrary, he's become increasingly important to me. This morning, I got up and made breakfast, then called Marius to wake up. Over time, I realized this usually disciplined man had gradually started sleeping in. I quietly opened the bedroom door, walked to the bedside, leaned down and gave his face a playful bite. "Marius, time to get up." Marius glanced at me with sleep still clouding his eyes, then raised his long arm and pulled me straight into his embrace. With a fluid motion, he rolled over, pinning me beneath him. His slightly hoarse voice murmured above my head, "Just a little longer." "No," I protested, poking his chest with my fingertip. "You said last night there's an important meeting this morning and made me promise to wake you up." Marius didn't respond, but buried his face against my neck, nuzzling lightly, ticklish. His voice came muffled. "It's all because of you, keeping me up half the night." My eyes widened as I reached out to push him. "Marius, how unreasonable can you be?" It was clearly him. Last night he was insatiable, leaving my legs weak and my back sore even now. Marius chuckled lowly, bracing himself on the bed with one hand before pressing a kiss to my lips. "You're the one who tempted me." His remark about seducing him made me blush crimson. Well, it wasn't really seduction, was it? I just happened to be wearing a special set of lingerie. Marius gave a low chuckle, seeming fully awake now as he got up and headed to the bathroom. By the time he finished washing up, I'd already prepared his outfit for the day, the suit neatly pressed and a matching tie selected. Marius teased while changing clothes. "You're becoming more and more like a perfect housewife now." I snorted. "Consider yourself lucky if you ever marry me." Marius froze momentarily, saying nothing. Truth be told, I didn't understand why either Marius and I were living together quite harmoniously, yet we never mentioned the future, especially not words like marriage. Though I know that with Marius's temperament, he would surely take responsibility for me in the future and marry me. But, I always greedily think, just wait a little longer, until the day he willingly marries me. If one day I do get to marry Marius, I hope it's for love, not out of obligation. Isn't that greedy of me? But it seems that's just how people are when we can't have someone. We think simply being together would be enough, even if they don't love us, yet once we're together, we inevitably start wanting more. A smile from them makes me crave a kiss makes me long for tenderness, and when tenderness comes, I start wishing they'd stay with me forever. We keep unconsciously demanding more, until they belong to us completely. At the breakfast table, I was scrolling through my phone while eating, while Marius sipped coffee and read the newspaper. This was his habit, a demeanor so quintessentially old-school bureaucrat. Suddenly, I came across a video about a newly opened cake shop in our city, where their black truffle cake was an absolute sensation, available only at 6 p.m. daily and selling out within minutes. The queue stretched down the block every day, and rumor had it the owner was notoriously stubborn. Everyone had to wait in line, even the mayor wouldn't get special treatment. But, I don't know how it tastes, but its appearance truly captivates me. The classic black swan design makes it impossible for me to look away. Marius, I tugged at his sleeve. Isn't this cake beautiful? I eagerly shared it with him, but Marius only glanced at it. Beautiful. Then, he quickly finished his coffee, folded the newspaper, and stood up. I'm running out of time. I need to go now. I opened my mouth, but in the end, all I said was, okay. Ever since that incident at the drinking party, I've tried my best to be considerate and sensible. I know Marius is successful in his career, even if I can't help him. At the very least, I shouldn't hold him back. Even Marius himself often hugs me and says, Eileen has grown up. That evening, as usual, I prepared dinner and waited for him to come home. But no matter how long I waited, there was no sign of him. Normally, he would come home early every day, usually by 7:30, unless he had social engagements. But today, he was unusually late. The food grew cold and was reheated, and I barely resisted the urge to call him. When the clock struck 9, the door opened. Marius walked in slowly, carrying the chill of the night, and like a magician, produced an exquisite cake box from behind him. I was utterly stunned. It was exactly the cake I had mentioned that morning. I looked up at him and saw Marius taking off his coat to hang it up. Open it and try, he said. I carefully opened the box. The line for this must have been so long. Marius replied, sitting at the table. I was afraid you'd say I lacked sincerity, so I went and stood in line myself to buy it. As he spoke, Marius cut a slice of cake and scooped a piece with a spoon, bringing it to my lips. I took a bite. It truly lived up to its reputation. Sweet but not cloying, melting effortlessly in my mouth. Marius, I held his hand and blinked subtly. I have a surprise for you too. What surprise? I pulled a piece of paper from my pocket, unfolded it, and presented it like a treasure before Marius. He glanced at it and froze instantly. It wasn't just freezing, I could feel Marius's body stiffen considerably. Still, his reaction was exactly what I'd expected. Before him lay a medical examination report. I'm pregnant. I waited nervously for Marius's reaction. My heart couldn't help but feel uneasy, though I'd called it a surprise for him. Who knew whether it might actually be a shock to him instead? It's okay. After a long moment, Marius snapped out of his daze and scooped me up in his arms. Eileen, I'm going to be a dad. Hearing the word dad come from the usually meticulous Marius's mouth left me momentarily dazed. With one hand protecting my belly and the other tightly wrapped around his neck, I replied, yes. You're going to be a dad. As I touched my still flat abdomen, a wave of sweetness washed over me. After 10 months of pregnancy, I'm about to become a mother. And the child I'm carrying in my womb is Marius's. Just thinking about it fills me with sweetness. It's clear that Marius is also overjoyed for this unexpected little life. His anticipation seems no less than mine. However, after calming down, we had to face some practical issues. Being pregnant meant we needed to prepare for marriage, and marriage meant meeting the parents. Marius meeting his mother-in-law. This whole parental introduction process was awkward enough. Moreover, since I've been with Marius, these past few months he's never met my mother. Every time I go home, he just drives me to the building entrance and leaves, then picks me up when I'm ready to return. Mentioning this routine, I also feel a bit awkward. Maybe I should go home and talk to them myself. After all, given our relationship, my mom probably won't demand much bride price from you. Hearing my words, Marius showed a hint of unease in his eyes. However, he still shook his head and then slowly took my hand. I'll go back with you. Your marriage is something she should have a say in. After a pause, he lowered his gaze to meet mine. Besides, we'll have to face it eventually, won't we? I nodded without another word. I knew there was no avoiding this hurdle, including the upcoming meeting with Marius's family. But the thought of him meeting my mom suddenly filled me with an invisible pressure. Even though I knew many things were simply impossible, I couldn't help worrying. But since I was already 1 month pregnant, everything had to be rushed. With the baby bump typically showing by the 3rd month, I naturally didn't want to waddle down the aisle at my own wedding. So everything from meeting the parents to discussing marriage plans and preparing for the wedding had to be scheduled as soon as possible. No matter how much he wanted to avoid it, Marius's day of meeting his mother-in-law had finally arrived. It was far more awkward than we had ever imagined. Marius carried a pile of gifts as he accompanied me home. When the door opened, my mother stood at the entrance. She and Marius stared at each other for a long moment before my mother finally waved her hand dismissively. Forget it, let's keep it casual. Just call me by my name as usual. Even setting aside past sentiments, Marius and my mother had been friends for 30 years. The term mother-in-law stuck in his throat, impossible to utter. I and Marius walked through the door. Compared to Marius's reserved demeanor, I was much more at ease. Plopping down on the sofa, looking up at my mom and Noel who were making tea, I rubbed my stomach and asked, Mom, how much bride price are you planning to ask for? My mom shot me a glare, then turned to Marius, saying seriously, that depends on his sincerity. Marius sat upright with an extremely earnest expression. 1 million, as he spoke. He picked up the teacup and took a sip before immediately asking, "Is it enough?" I sat there, utterly stunned. 1 million yuan in betrothal gifts, while for wealthy families, tens of millions might not be an issue. I've been an ordinary commoner since childhood. My mother raised me on her meager earnings, and when I worked at the factory, my monthly salary was just a few thousand yuan. 1 million is indeed an astronomical bride price for me. I swallowed hard, wanting to refuse. But my mother stopped me with a look. "Okay," my mother responded without hesitation, showing no politeness at all. She looked calmly at Marius, her expression serious. "You know, if it were someone else marrying Eileen, I wouldn't mind a bride price of 30 or 50,000, but Eileen is determined to be with you, and now she's pregnant. Given the differences in your ages and life experiences, no one can predict the future. I must ensure Eileen has some security." After years of friendship, my mother didn't beat around the bush and spoke frankly. Marius nodded. "I understand. Don't worry, I can afford this money. After marriage, I'll transfer the property to Eileen's name, and moreover," he paused, pursed his lips, then took my hand. "I won't betray her." A simple "won't betray" was his promise to me, and to my mother. My mother's expression softened slightly. "Don't worry, I won't take a single penny of the betrothal gifts. Let Eileen keep it all for herself. I'll also do my best to prepare a dowry for Eileen. Whatever other families have, Eileen will have no less." Marius nodded without saying a word. The atmosphere was somewhat awkward, especially when mentioning the upcoming meeting with Marius's parents. The mood grew even more tense. At that moment, Noel broke the ice at just the right time. "Let's go. I've reserved a restaurant in advance. We can talk over dinner." Everyone agreed and stood up cheerfully. Out of habit, I reached to take Marius's arm, but the Marius who used to wrap his arm around my waist instead flinched slightly the moment I touched him, visibly uncomfortable. My hand grasped at empty air. Coming to my senses, Marius quickly glanced at my mother by the door putting on her shoes, pursed his lips awkwardly, and whispered to me, "Sorry, it's fine," I replied swiftly, afraid he might see the disappointment in my eyes. I smiled and withdrew my hand that was about to take his arm. As if persuading him, yet also persuading myself, "You'll get used to it gradually." We went out and got into the car. Marius was driving. Noel, who gets car 6, sat in the passenger seat, while my mother and I took the back row. The car window was half open, letting in a gentle breeze that felt quite refreshing. I turned to look at my mom. I couldn't help but marvel at how time seems to be kind to certain people, like Marius, and like my mom. At over 40 years old, if you don't look too closely, you wouldn't spot a single fine line around her eyes. Saying she looks 18 would be an exaggeration, but most people would easily believe she's 28. Moreover, she's maintained a consistent exercise routine over the years, keeping her figure in perfect shape, with her outstanding poise and that delicate face of hers. It's no exaggeration to say that even now when we go out together, people still occasionally come up to flirt with her. Moreover, compared to girls in their early 20s, she carried an added charm. If I were Marius, I'd probably fall for my mom too. As if sensing my gaze, my mother turned to look at me, gave me a once-over, then gently took my hand without a word. The car was enveloped in silence, soon, following the address provided by Noel. The car pulled into the parking lot beneath a certain hotel. We opened the doors, got out, and entered the hotel. This hotel could be considered mid to high-end, offering good value for money with relatively affordable prices, so business has always been brisk. Noel had reserved a spot 2 days in advance, yet even then couldn't secure a private room. Fortunately, we managed to get a table by the window in the main dining area. The 4 of us took our seats, and Noel first busied himself pouring water for my mom before handing the menu to me and Marius. "Take a look and order whatever you like. Don't hold back." Noel was grinning, looking utterly simple and honest. After getting to know him better, I realized my mom was right. Noel really was quite adorable. Despite his burly frame and the full-sleeve tattoos that gave him the appearance of a gangster boss, he was actually very easygoing. The moment someone complimented him, he'd instantly blush, sheepishly rubbing the back of his head with that same simple and honest expression. Just as we finished ordering and were waiting for our food, an unexpected incident occurred at the next table. At the next table sat 7 or 8 middle-aged men. They hadn't ordered much food, but the table was covered with liquor bottles. It was only noon, yet they were already thoroughly drunk. Drunkards always love to stir up trouble. Sure enough, as they drank and chatted, a conflict somehow erupted, and their conversation quickly turned to shouting. I glanced over curiously but didn't pay it much mind. Yet as the shouting continued, the entire table suddenly erupted into a brawl. Everything happened too fast. Before the surrounding tables could react, bottles, bowls, and chopsticks from their table were already flying through the air. Bang! A dull thud sounded as someone from the next table threw a teacup right on target, hitting my mother squarely on the head. My mother instinctively cried out in shock, clutching her head tightly with both hands. It must have hurt badly. It was all too sudden, not just Noel, who had his back to that table, but even Marius and I, who were watching them throw things, couldn't react in time. Noel shot to his feet in an instant, rolling up his sleeves to reveal his tattooed arms. I initially thought he was just trying to intimidate, but to my surprise, he didn't hesitate for even a second before charging forward. I apologize for my previous impression of Noel as simple and honest. With skills like that, he must have been part of the underworld in the past. He rushed forward and knocked someone down in a few moves, Noel grabbing him by the collar with a furious expression. Who the hell threw that glass? The whole group was stunned by Noel. When they snapped out of it, they stopped their internal squabble and surrounded Noel. The three of us quickly rushed over as well. Worried the situation might escalate and Noel would get hurt, my mom and I started trying to break up the fight. With the hotel security arriving just then, we finally managed to separate the two groups. Returning to the table, Noel looked at my mother's reddened forehead with visible distress, asking the waiter for some ice cubes and carefully applying them to her injury. My mother, however, felt somewhat embarrassed by his fussing and pushed him away lightly, chiding, "It's nothing. Just a minor injury, I'm not that delicate." Yet, Noel, who had always been gentle with her, shot her a glare and grabbed her hand as she tried to push him away. "What do you mean minor? I wouldn't even dare touch you roughly. Why should those scumbags get to hit you?" Noel didn't bother lowering his voice as he spoke, prompting several drunkards at the neighboring table to stand up and shout, "Who the hell are you calling scumbags?" Noel also had a fiery temper and immediately stood up. Just as both sides were about to start arguing again, my mom quickly intervened to calm Noel down. After calming down, Noel gave me and Marius an apologetic look, scratching his head. "Sorry for ruining the mood. I usually don't care what people say about me, but when it comes to Gina, I quickly waved my hands, saying, "It's fine. I'm actually glad you care so much about my mom." Noel smiled sheepishly. "Well, you can rest assured no matter how tough I act outside. The moment I see your mom, I turn into a total pushover." My mother shot him a glare, cursed with a laugh, and the little episode was over. Only later did I notice that Marius seemed somewhat quiet. The rowdy drunks at the next table left after finishing their meal, and the rest of our dinner passed relatively harmoniously. After the meal, Noel ran off to pay the bill. As we left the hotel and headed to the parking lot, we were still discussing when to meet Marius' parents. Originally, according to Marius' plan, he intended to have his parents come meet my mother out of respect for the bride's family, but my mother repeatedly waved her hands in refusal. Normally, I'd have to address them as uncle and aunt based on seniority. How could we let them come to us? "We should go to your house to discuss the wedding arrangements." Still talking, we made our way to the parking lot. As I approached the car, suddenly, the roar of an engine erupted from behind me, following Marius. I turned back in confusion, only to be blinded by glaring headlights. Before I could react, the white sedan abruptly accelerated, charging straight toward us. In that split second, I instinctively reached for Marius, shouting to my mother and the others, "Get out of the way." However, at the moment the car came speeding towards us, each of us reacted differently. With one hand protecting my abdomen, I reached out to push away the nearest person, Marius. My mother ran over in horror, trying to shield me. Meanwhile, Noel and Marius acted in unison. Both dashed in front of my mother and pushed her out of harm's way. Of the four of us, I was the only one exposed within the car's line of sight, though it feels slow in the telling. In reality, from the moment I noticed the car behind us to its sudden charge, mere seconds had passed. We had no time for careful thought. Every action was pure instinct. Amidst a chorus of startled cries, I felt myself being violently struck, my entire body sent flying through the air. "Eileen, Eileen!" Several exclamations rang out in quick succession near my ears as I lay sprawled on the ground, my mind completely blank. My vision seemed a bit blurry. "Eileen." Someone gently touched my arm. It seemed to be Marius's voice, trembling as he murmured my name. "Eileen." I opened my eyes to look at him, and all I could see was his panicked face. My heart ached as I watched, wanting to offer some words of comfort, but the next moment, everything went black as I completely lost consciousness. When I woke again, I was already in the hospital. Opening my eyes, I saw nothing but sterile white everywhere. Several people sat in the room, all looking haggard. The one by my bedside was my mother, Eileen. She suddenly grasped my hand, her eyes instantly reddening. "You're finally awake." My head throbbed with pain, and my body felt unbearably heavy. I frowned. Was I asleep for long? My mother choked back a sob. "It's been almost 3 days. You scared me to death." It was rare to see my mother like this, and my heart ached. Hoarsely, I reassured her, "I'm fine now, don't worry." Yet, for some reason, a shadow of sorrow flickered through her eyes. Though she ultimately remained silent, after finally calming my mother down, I slowly looked up and immediately spotted Marius standing not far away, his face tense with worry. Our eyes met, his brightening slightly, yet he seemed unable to face me directly, his gaze momentarily evasive. That's right. At the critical moment of danger, instead of saving his pregnant fiancée, he rushed to rescue her mother. Isn't it ridiculous? I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter chuckle at this pitiful and absurd relationship. After locking eyes with him for a few seconds, I slowly shifted my gaze to my mother. "Mom, is the baby still there?" Truth be told, the moment those words left my lips, I already had a sinking feeling in my heart. Having been unconscious for nearly 3 days, how could the baby in my womb possibly be unharmed? Sure enough, the answer was exactly as I'd feared. My mother's eyes were red as she gently stroked my hair and whispered, "Eileen, sweetheart, there will be more in the future. There will be more in the future," which means, the child in my womb, the child between me and Marius, has already been lost. Oh, I froze for a long time before softly responding, "It's better this way. That it's gone, fine." Only at this moment did I suddenly realize that if I were born and raised in an ice-cold family, I probably wouldn't be happy either. Seeing my unusual state, my mother and Noel exchanged glances and silently walked out of the room. In the hospital room, only Marius and I remained. I lowered my gaze in silence, while he stood not far away, equally wordless. The hospital room was enveloped in stillness. After what felt like an eternity, he suddenly moved, approaching me slowly, sitting by the bedside. Marius gently took my hand, only to pause momentarily, seemingly startled by the coldness of my fingertips. "Eileen," he murmured in a low, slightly hoarse voice. I remained silent for a few seconds before looking up at him. Marius was gazing at me quietly, his brows slightly furrowed, his eyes terribly red, and his face unshaven. He looked somewhat haggard. He held my hand tightly, his eyes filled with remorse. "Eileen, I'm sorry. My dear, we'll have another child. Please don't be sad." I didn't speak, only continued to watch him quietly. My gaze traveled slowly from top to bottom, tracing the contours of his features. This is the man I've loved since the first awakening of my heart. It's still that familiar face, those same brows and eyes. Yet, why does it suddenly feel somewhat strange now? I slowly raised my hand, gently touching the side of his face. "It's all right." For some reason, the tip of my nose tingled with sourness. From the moment I woke up until now, even upon hearing the news of losing the baby, I hadn't shed a tear. But now, inexplicably, my eyes reddened. I gazed at him quietly. "There won't be any more." Marius stared at me blankly, a trace of astonishment in his eyes. "There won't be any more." I meant the child, but not just the child. For some reason, meeting my gaze, Marius's eyes instantly reddened once more, his brows furrowed tightly, forming a deep character between them. "Eileen, don't be like this. We'll be fine. We'll..." His words were cut short when I suddenly interrupted him. "It'll be fine. He'll take responsibility for me. We'll respect each other like honored guests for a lifetime, and then what? Never see my mother again for the rest of our lives." Marius's voice abruptly stopped. I don't know why, though my heart ached unbearably. I stubbornly refused to cry in front of him. I took a deep breath, suppressing the swirling sorrow in my chest, and looked up at him. "Marius, give me some time. Let me calm down." Marius remained silent for a long time before finally nodding slowly. He leaned down, tucking in the corner of my blanket, and said softly, "I'm sorry." Gazing at that all-too-familiar face, I struggled to hold back but ultimately couldn't resist asking him, "If you could do it all over again, what would you choose?" He froze for 2 seconds, then looked at me with a serious expression. "I'll save you." "Really, really?" I pulled my hand out from under the blanket and placed it on the bedside. "Is it out of duty?" Yet he fell silent again. 1 second. 2 seconds. Just as I was about to give up completely, Marius shook his head. "Eileen, actually, I deeply regret it." I smiled and said no more. For a fleeting moment, I suddenly felt disappointed in him, this man who had remained flawless in my eyes for so many years, this figure I once regarded as a hero. It was as if in that instant, the statue of him in my heart crumbled violently, shattering into pieces on the ground. Yes, he deeply regretted it. Given another chance, he might truly choose to save me. But so what? At the moment of true danger, despite me carrying his child, he still abandoned me without hesitation to save another woman, even if she was my mother. I still couldn't let it go. I didn't speak again, just closed my eyes. "I'm a bit tired." After a long while, Marius's voice finally came from above. "Rest for a while. I'll stay here with you. Call if you need anything." I didn't respond, nor did I open my eyes. The ward was completely silent. As I lay there, I actually fell asleep, all day long. My mother and Marius stayed with me in the ward every day. Sometimes, my mother would deliberately find excuses to leave, giving Marius and me some space alone. I knew she wanted us to speak our minds openly, yet, some emotional knots can never be fully explained. Those truly worthy of being called knots in the heart are all ineffable existences. However, it wasn't until evening that I faintly began to sense something amiss. Why, can't I feel my legs at all? But no matter how I pressed them, my mother and Marius only said it was because the anesthesia from my earlier surgery hadn't worn off yet. I wanted to sit up and take a look, but they all found various excuses to refuse. I grew suspicious. Finally, when Marius was called into the doctor's office, I pretended to be asleep with my eyes closed, seeing me sound asleep. My mother picked up a tissue and went to the bathroom. Hearing the door close, I opened my eyes and tried to sit up, but my lower body was completely numb, offering no strength at all. After a couple of attempts, I couldn't sit up, so I could only grab the corner of the quilt and pull it down. I froze for 2 seconds, then couldn't help but let out a scream. I stared in horror at my lower body, but where my legs should have been, there was now only empty space. The door was flung open violently. Marius rushed in swiftly. He froze for a second, then hurried over and pulled me into his embrace. "Don't look, Eileen, don't look." His voice trembled terribly, his arms around me stiff as stone. "Eileen," his voice choked with sobs. "I've asked the doctors, you can get prosthetic limbs. I'll find you the best specialists, even if it bankrupts me. Don't be afraid, I'll stay with you always, I'll protect you." But as he spoke, he himself broke down and started crying first. He pulled me into his embrace, and I stood there in a daze. My mind went completely blank. Truth be told, I didn't hear a single word he said. Only one sentence kept echoing in my mind. "I, Eileen, have become useless." Marius's tears fell on my neck. Scalding hot, I was stunned for a long time before barely regaining my composure. I pushed him away, and when I looked at my legs again, the sheet had already been pulled over them by him. I stared at him blankly, my expression dazed. "Marius, tell me, will I even lose the ability to take care of myself in the future?" In one sentence, Marius's emotions completely collapsed in an instant. After knowing him for so many years, it was the first time I'd ever seen him slumped by my bedside, sobbing uncontrollably. The one who should be crying is clearly me. Yet strangely, I couldn't shed a single tear. "Marius," I called softly. "The ones who hit me with their car were those drunkards at the next table, weren't they?" He choked for a long time before barely managing to speak. "Yes." Marius held me tightly, his palm resting on my hair, gently stroking. "Eileen, don't worry, I'll use every connection I have to make them pay." I nodded. "Okay." Marius, I didn't doubt his words in the slightest, yet for such deep-seated hatred, I no longer had much heart to pursue it. My mind is completely occupied with thoughts of what I should do in the future. Am I really going to become a useless person? What should I do if I can't even take care of myself later? I don't know the answer, and perhaps no one can give me this answer. People always seem stronger than they imagine themselves to be. I quickly came to terms with reality. Faced with this unexpected event, I remained calmer than anyone else. In contrast, my mother and the other two grew increasingly remorseful, sighing all day long, each looking more haggard than the last. That evening, Noel even knelt before me, weeping bitterly, saying none of this would have happened if he hadn't gotten into that fight with those people. I patted his hand and said softly, "Noel, get up, it's not your fault. What did he do wrong?" He was only protecting my mother wholeheartedly and standing up for her. No one could have predicted what happened afterward, though I said I didn't mind. All three of them lived in self-blame, especially Marius. He seemed to have aged many years overnight. In just a few short days, he transformed from that gentle, youthful man into a haggard, unshaven uncle. Gone was the spirited confidence of the past. Even those always kind eyes had completely dimmed, but I no longer knew whether it was simply self-reproach, or if there was also regret and heartache. I no longer dared to trust him, and now, to me, nothing seems to matter anymore. Nothing matters. Since waking up, I've calmly accepted it all, yet in silence, I've quietly locked myself away in a dark room. My world has been plunged into perpetual darkness since then. Marius didn't lie to me. Like a madman, he mobilized all his connections and resources, spending an uncountable fortune with just one goal: to secure a heavier sentence for the drunk driver who intentionally hit me, leaving me disabled. In the end, that drunkard was sentenced to 10 years in prison. 10 years. He spent 10 years in prison, taking away the rest of my life. After the lawsuit ended, Marius started seeking out renowned doctors and department heads everywhere to treat me. But everyone knew it was just for psychological comfort. The final outcome would still be getting a prosthetic limb. After all, this isn't a fracture, it's an amputation. No matter what, Marius wouldn't give up and found the most authoritative doctor to prepare a prosthetic limb for me, from beginning to end. I never asked a single word. A prosthetic limb, no matter how flexible it is, it's still fake, just like the feelings between me and Marius before. It seems warm and loving. We embrace, we kiss, we share a bed, and in moments of passion, he has even whispered "I love you" in my ear. But what was the result? All of it was just a fleeting illusion. When real danger came, his first choice was never me. What's fake remains fake. Never able to withstand the test, my face remained calm, but inside, I grew increasingly despondent. Moreover, recently I heard a joke that was quite hilarious. One night, Marius got drunk, and in the hospital room where only the two of us were present, he held my hand and sobbed uncontrollably. He said he now lived day and night in regret and torment, wishing it were him lying injured on the hospital bed instead. He also said, during the days I was unconscious, he finally realized that he had already fallen in love with me long ago. He just hadn't been aware of it himself. It was love, not obligation, not settling for second best, nor reluctantly accepting, but genuinely wanting to protect me, to walk hand in hand with me through the rest of our lives. Tell me, is this joke funny? Strangely enough, listening to his confession, words that would have moved me to tears in the past, now left me utterly calm. Not a single ripple stirred in my heart. Lying on the hospital bed, I watched him quietly, never uttering a single word from start to finish. But I sighed softly in my heart. Too late, Marius, it's far too late. The days passed in a daze. Later, I was fitted with prosthetic limbs and began the long process of recovery and rehabilitation training. I never got used to those artificial legs. In the dead of night, I would often stare at them, feeling terrified. I was Marius taken back home. But I started having nightmares every night. Each time, I would wake up screaming and crying, and Marius would always hold me the moment he saw me, pulling me tightly into his embrace. His voice soft as he whispered words of comfort. It's all right, Eileen, I'm here, Eileen, don't be afraid. He repeated his reassurances over and over, but he didn't know, to the present me, his presence could no longer bring me even the slightest sense of security. What truly crushed me wasn't the moment of abandonment back then, nor was it the inability to walk. Rather, it was the undeniable reality that I had become completely useless. Now, forget about learning to walk again, I can't even take care of my most basic needs. After being discharged home, Marius stayed by my side day and night for many days, attending to every aspect of my life with meticulous care, eating, drinking, and even the most personal needs. He is very considerate. Yet I find it increasingly hard to accept. I can no longer be as intimate with him as before, because now even going to the bathroom requires him to carry me there. Actually, the doctor suggested I temporarily handle my physiological needs in bed, using special bedpans, but I refused. No matter what, I couldn't bring myself to do these things in bed, so I persisted and had Marius carry me to the bathroom. I grew increasingly silent, as did everyone around me, not just my mother and Marius. But even Noel, who used to scratch his head with a simple, silly grin, became melancholy and never smiled again. Marius stayed by my side for a long time, but financially, it became unsustainable. Earlier, pulling strings to arrange doctors and medical treatments for me had nearly drained all his savings, while the company business he delegated to subordinates also sharply declined. To earn money and support me, Marius had to shuttle between the company and home every day. Originally, my mother was ready to take over from Marius to care for me, but as misfortunes never come singly, she fell ill, worried and depressed for days. She had been in poor health recently when acute appendicitis suddenly struck, requiring hospitalization for surgery. Though it was just a minor procedure, bed rest was unavoidable. Left with no choice, Marius hired a female caregiver for me. The caregiver appeared to be in her 40s or 50s, when Marius was present. She attended to me with meticulous care and exceptional gentleness, yet when we were alone at home, she would often mutter under her breath nearby, saying things like "living so pathetically, you might as well die," or "can't even control your basic functions." How disgusting, I could hear, but had no mind to scold. Each day, I grew more sullen, beginning to shut myself away, demanding the nurses draw the heavy curtains to block out all sunlight and brightness. Every day, I lay alone in bed, in the dim unlit room, lost in thought for hours on end. I think my mind is slowly becoming twisted. Gradually, my temper became gloomy and violent. I began to vent every night Marius when he came home from work, unleashing my dissatisfaction and resentment. I didn't want to, really, but I couldn't control myself. Countless times, in the dead of night, I would grab his arm and bite him like a madwoman, not stopping until the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. I sobbed and pulled at him, hurling the most hurtful words from my lips. "Marius, I hate you. If it weren't for you, I would never have ended up like this. Yet deep down, I knew the one who harmed me wasn't him at all. In truth, he did nothing wrong, he simply didn't choose to protect me when it mattered most, but I still resent him for it. Countless nights I wept, cursing him over and over, biting him, saying I hated him. Each time, he would silently hold me, letting me vent my rage upon him, yet more often, he would embrace me while crying himself, his fragmented sobs echoing through the room until inevitably, they would move me to tears as well. Then, in the empty room, we held each other and wept bitterly. We torment each other, yet depend on each other. I've actually thought about death more than once, but I still can't bear to let go. I can't bear to leave my mother behind. She raised me all by herself, and I know I'm her entire life's work and hope. I also can't bear to part with Marius. Even though love and hate are tangled together, I still can't let him go. Every day, I live in chaos, constantly wavering. Sometimes I would lie in a pitch-dark room all day with a gloomy expression. Sometimes I would grab Marius and weep while hurling accusations, and other times I would try every means to end my life. Over and over again, I feel like I'm about to be driven mad by myself. What truly broke me was that day, September 2nd. I remember the day clearly because it happened to be the 1-year anniversary of Marius and me being together. However, perhaps due to something wrong with the lunch prepared by the female caregiver that noon, just as Marius was about to get off work, I started having stomach troubles. My lower abdomen churned with excruciating pain. Clutching the bedsheet tightly, I called out loudly for the female caregiver, but she was in the living room and only responded lazily, taking forever to show up. No matter how much I shouted, she remained unmoved. I can hardly hold it in anymore. Since the car accident, I seem to have lost control over my bodily functions. Fortunately, just as I was about to soil myself, Marius happened to return home, as usual. The first thing he did upon entering was push open the door to check on me. Eileen, he turned on the light, holding a small cake box in his hand. Happy anniversary, darling. It was the same little cake he once queued up to buy for me, Marius. I struggled to speak, completely lacking the energy to even glance at the cake. I guessed my face must be flushed crimson by now. I need to use the bathroom. Marius, startled, immediately set down the cake and rushed over to lift me, quickly carrying me toward the bathroom. Yet, it's too late now. Despite my best efforts to hold back, my current physical condition still failed me. Just like that, while still being held in Marius's arms, I couldn't help but soil my pants. An unpleasant smell began to permeate the air. The finale. I froze for a long moment before finally losing control, suddenly breaking down into loud sobs. How could this happen? I've never done anything bad in my life. Why is this happening to me? Apart from being mischievous as a child, apart from not liking to study in school, apart from falling in love with an older man who didn't love me back, I've never done anything truly wrong in my life. Why did it come to this? Marius had red-rimmed eyes as he held me tightly, whispering words of comfort in my ear over and over. He carried me to the bathroom, removed my clothes, and gently washed me with warm water. I kept staring at him blankly. This man, he no longer seemed young. Just before my accident, he had still looked like a youth barely past 20. Yet in these few short months, he appeared to have aged decades. A perpetual stubble shadowed his jaw, dark circles rimmed his eyes which were always bloodshot, and at a glance, strands of white could already be seen threading through his hair. Now he looked haggard, appearing like a man in his 40s or 50s. He carefully washed my body, softly comforting me, trying his best to tell jokes to make me forget the recent humiliation. But he didn't know there were still traces of filth on the corner of his clothes, glaringly obvious in my eyes. That night, I didn't scold him again, didn't clutch his sleeve to speak of love or hate, and didn't weep bitterly either. Uncharacteristically, I hugged him in bed. Marius's body was terribly stiff. Trembling, he held me tight, repeating I love you over and over, but I was no longer that little girl who would beam with joy just hearing the words I love you. That night was the only truly restful sleep I'd had since the car accident. The next day, Marius rarely took a day off to stay home with me. Recently, he's been running between home and the company, overwhelmed with work, and I know he's pushing himself so hard all for my sake. My subsequent treatment costs are quite high, and even for Marius, it's a financial strain. Eileen, in the early morning, Marius got up, changed his clothes, shaved, and then pulled open the heavy curtains in the room. Tonight, I have a very important banquet to attend. Can you wait for me at home in the evening? He walked to the bedside and gently ruffled my hair. At the banquet, I need to discuss a business deal with a certain CEO. If this deal goes through, the company can basically get back on track, and we can focus on treatment without worries. All right, he coaxed me softly, carefully, using a tone as if speaking to a child. Lying on the bed, I quietly looked at him. All right, after a pause. I asked him softly, Marius, can you take me with you? Marius was momentarily stunned. I had expected him to show some disdain or resistance, but there was none. Unexpectedly, his eyes instantly brightened as he took my hand and asked with delighted surprise, you'd really go? Wonderful. I'll have a makeup artist come to the house this afternoon, and I'll take you to the banquet with me tonight. Lowering his gaze to meet mine, his eyes shimmering, he added, your willingness to go out is the best thing that could happen. I looked at him quietly and replied, all right. The next day, Marius was very happy, because today, I didn't wallow in self-pity or burst into gloomy tears. Today, I was in a good mood. I could smile at him and gently hold his hand. In the afternoon, the makeup artist arrived at the house as promised. I called Marius to the bedside. Marius, I want to eat the snail noodles from that shop across the street. He froze for a moment. Right now, I nodded, suddenly got a craving. Okay, without hesitation, he agreed, then gently ruffled my hair. I'll go buy it right away. With those words, he gave me a couple reminders before turning to leave. Just as he reached the doorway, I suddenly spoke up and called out to him. Remember to buy another one of my favorite little cakes, Uncle Marius. Marius startled slightly at my sudden address, then smiled as he regained his composure. Don't worry, he said, then. He turned around and hurried out the door closed, and only after making sure he had left did I turn to look at the makeup artist beside me. She appeared to be under 30, with long black hair and a gentle demeanor. Excuse me, I said softly, I need to use the bathroom. Could you step out for a moment? She visibly hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the bed. Then, would you like me to help you there? No need, I chuckled softly. I have a prosthetic, I can manage on my own. She nodded, just call me anytime if you need anything. She stepped out and, mindful of privacy, closed the door behind her. Lying on the bed, I smiled to myself. It's true that I have a prosthetic limb, but I can't use it at all out of resistance. I've never practiced with it. I had long since given up on myself. Lifting the pillow, I picked up the fruit knife hidden beneath it. A nurse had absent-mindedly left it there 2 days ago while peeling an apple by my bedside. I'd kept it hidden for 2 days, yet still couldn't summon the resolve. Until yesterday's scene unfolded, my will to live was completely extinguished. Mom, I'm sorry, I might disappoint you, but I truly can't bear being like this anymore. I can't accept becoming a useless person in my early 20s, wasting away the rest of my life like this. I want the Marius in Eileen's memory to always be that lively, laughing girl who would cling to his arm coquettishly, who would tease and seduce him in bed, a radiant, flesh and blood Eileen, not the useless person who has lost even basic self-control, the Eileen who soiled her pants in his arms because she couldn't make it to the bathroom. Forget who was right or wrong in the past, let everything end here. I took a deep breath, gripped the knife handle tightly, and then, slowly and calmly, made a deep cut on my wrist. I was determined to die this cut. I made it with all my strength. Blood gushed out instantly. Strangely, I didn't even feel much pain. I just watched quietly as the crimson trail snaked before me. In my heart, there was no fear of facing death, only a sense of relief. In truth, I suppose I still resent Marius. When he returns to find I've taken my own life, he'll surely understand what I meant by calling him Uncle Marius before I left. In all my life, having known him for 20 years, I've always addressed him casually by his name without regard for propriety. The one and only time I properly called him uncle was at our final parting. Uncle Marius. I didn't leave a suicide note, just a letter for my mother in the mailbox. As for Marius, I left not a single word. The last sentence Uncle Marius was my final words to him. He'll understand later. The only time in my life I called him uncle was my way of telling him, gently, that I regretted it. I regret my youthful recklessness, treating love as my only light, betting everything on loving him. I regret it, knowing full well his heart belonged to another, yet I still threw myself into the flames, stayed by his side, even carried his child. Uncle Marius, if there is an afterlife, if we meet again, if you're still 15 years older than me, then, in the next life, just be an uncle. Being lovers is too exhausting. I could feel the blood in my body nearly drained, my vision gradually blurring. Just before I completely lost consciousness, I faintly heard the makeup artist scream, followed by a clamor, within which seemed to be mixed with Marius's trembling voice. He sobbed, crying that he was wrong, begging me to come back. Consciousness gradually fades away. There's no coming back. Uncle Marius. Extra story. Marius's chapter. Eileen has passed away. I didn't go to buy her favorite snail noodles and little cakes, because on the way there, the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became, feeling that something wasn't quite right. What exactly was it? It seems, it was when she called out Uncle Marius. She had never been one to follow rules her whole life, calling me by my name directly since childhood, especially after growing up. Yet, why would someone who had been so rule-breaking for over 20 years suddenly take it into her head to call me uncle? After all, our identities were the very thing she detested most. The more I thought about it, the more something felt off, so I hurried back in haste, but it was already too late. When I saw the makeup artist standing at the stairway, my heart sank. Seeing me, the makeup artist quickly explained that Eileen had asked to use the bathroom and told her to wait outside. Eileen couldn't possibly get out of bed and walk around. Her words sent a chill down my spine, and I instantly realized it was all just Eileen's excuse. I immediately dashed upstairs, but, the moment I entered, the metallic scent of blood assaulted my nostrils. That once lively girl who always laughed and played, whose eyes sparkled whenever she looked at me, now lay amidst a pool of blood, utterly lifeless. Stumbling forward, I tried to gather her in my arms, but she was so thin, so small, so pale and fragile, it seems like it would shatter at the slightest touch. I don't even dare to touch it. The blood was blindingly bright. Trembling, I pulled out my phone to call for help, but my hands shook so violently that the phone fell to the ground with a dull thud. The makeup artist followed, her face filled with horror, and said, "Mr. Marius, I've already called an ambulance, but it looks like, you should check for a pulse first." My hand reached out, trembling uncontrollably. My fingertips brushed before her nose. Lifeless, my Eileen left this world she so dearly loved, meeting a tragic end. If time could flow backward, I would choose to return to the day of the car accident. I would shield her the moment the vehicle came charging toward us. Yet in this world, there are consequences and outcomes, but never any what ifs. Time cannot flow backward. Eileen will never return after all. To be honest, there was a time when I considered Eileen to be my burden. Facing this person who suddenly transformed from a familiar girl into my girlfriend, I often felt dazed and unable to adjust. I even blamed myself for that night's loss of control and drunken recklessness, and grew frustrated at the thought of bearing lifelong responsibility. Actually, I've always been lying to myself, telling myself that I'm only with Eileen out of a sense of responsibility, that I don't love her. Yet, in the end, when I cast aside all preconceptions, I finally realized. There's no such thing as losing control after drinking. It was all a lie. No matter how much alcohol I consumed that night, crossing that final boundary had nothing to do with the drink. It was all about the heart. A fleeting moment of infatuation, a night of surrender. Under the pretense of responsibility, I reluctantly stayed with her, indulging in her youthful and beautiful body while secretly longing for another in the depths of midnight dreams. It wasn't until Eileen passed away that I realized I, Marius, am the worst man I've ever known. Without exception, I also understood why. That day when Eileen sent me away, she suddenly called me Uncle Marius. Throughout her life, she had known me for years. Even as a child, she mischievously called me by my name directly. The only time she ever properly addressed me as Uncle Marius was at our final farewell. I knew then, that was her way of saying goodbye to me, in her own way. She was telling me gently yet resolutely that she was leaving me completely, and, even if there were another lifetime, she had no intention of being entangled with me again. Even if we meet again, I'll just be uncle. Every time I recall her saying Uncle Marius, my heart aches unbearably. In this life, I've barely achieved career success, yet at 36, having gained and lost, I finally understood when I completely lost the girl whose eyes would light up at the sight of me. I've lived such a failed life. Having lived half a lifetime and approaching the age of 40, I find myself still unable to fathom my own heart, or perhaps I've already understood it through years of intimate familiarity, and am merely pretending not to know. During the Qingming festival, I stand before the tombstone, quietly gazing at the black and white photograph on it. Eileen wore a white dress, smiling radiantly, with starlight shimmering in the corners of her eyes, exceptionally bright. I reached out to wipe the dust off her tombstone and whispered softly, "Eileen, I've come to see you." Yet, it seemed she didn't want to see me, for as soon as the words left my lips, a gust of wind arose, coincidentally stirring the unburned ashes from someone's paper offerings nearby just in time to land precisely on the back of my hand. A sharp sting shot through me, making me instinctively pull back my hand, but my heart plummeted straight to the depths in that instant. Eileen. It's ultimately my fault. Since the car accident happened, she never uttered a single word of blame, yet we both knew that split-second scene from the crash became her eternal burden, and mine too. After wiping her tombstone clean and rambling onto her for hours, I finally rose slowly as the sun set in the west. "Eileen, I'm leaving." Naturally, no one responded to me. Yet, on the black tombstone, I faintly saw my own reflection, haggard in appearance, weary in spirit. Even a few white hairs had sprouted on my head. Since Eileen passed away, no one has leaned on my shoulder and playfully plucked out the occasional white hair that appeared. I stood up to leave, Yet the scene from back then seemed to gradually materialize before my eyes. The girl was leaning on my shoulder, one arm wrapped around my neck while the other hand played with my hair, occasionally letting out exaggerated exclamations whenever she discovered a white strand. Marius, are you going prematurely grey? At the time, I was usually sitting on the bed reading documents, and would respond with a resigned smile. I'm already 35, that's hardly premature. She would then tighten her arms around my neck, swaying back and forth as she nuzzled my face like a kitten, insisting, no way. To me, you'll always be young. As she spoke, she turned my face toward hers with a solemn vow-like determination, repeating earnestly, forever and always. Perhaps, at that time, she could never have imagined that in the future, she would bid me farewell with the words, Uncle Marius. That night, I lay in bed, the room empty and pitch black. Since Eileen left, I've dismissed the part-time housekeeper and refused to meet anyone. I've also grown fond of staying in my room, drawing the heavy curtains, and lying in the pitch-black darkness all day long. The bed remains the same one from before. I couldn't bear to replace it. Is that a bit perverse? But only in this way can I feel closer to her, and precisely because of this, I feel even more sorrowful. Only by putting myself in her shoes did I understand the torment she endured day and night back then. She was clearly such a girl who feared pain and death. What kind of suffering could have driven her to make that decisive, heavy cut without hesitation? I dare not think. The mere thought tears my heart apart with pain. The bedroom door stands ajar as I lie quietly on the bed, my head growing heavier. An indescribable scent lingers in the air. It's the smell of gas. I lay in bed, eyes closed, my mind wandering aimlessly. I must have forgotten to turn off the gas. Eileen. Ever since Eileen passed away, my memory has been terrible. Oh, wait, that's not right. I turned on the gas. I never intended to live on. In this lifetime, I've witnessed power and wealth. Yet the word love remained an unbroken armor, utterly defeated. A heart, day after day of longing, was gradually overtaken by that little girl whose eyes crinkled when she smiled, then tormented endlessly by nights of regret and remorse. Eileen. After she left, I never slept a full night again. I want to go see her, to hold her hand and tell her that I don't seem to want to be her uncle anymore, though, perhaps it's already too late to say such things. Eileen's chapter. If life truly offered a chance to start over, how would you choose? Will history repeat itself? I committed suicide by slitting my wrists, yet after what felt like an eternity, I woke up again, only to find myself transported back 1 year in time. There I was, perfectly fine, lying in bed with the wall calendar clearly displaying the date. I froze for a long, long time, then tremblingly pulled back the blanket beneath it. Both my legs were completely unharmed in that instant. An inexplicable sense of having lived through lifetimes washed over me. I covered my face tightly with both hands and burst into uncontrollable sobs. The door suddenly swung open as my mother rushed in. What's wrong, Eileen? She was wearing a floral apron, her face etched with worry. As she hurried over, she carried with her the faint, comforting aroma of chicken soup in the air. I looked up at her, gazing for a long time, then gently shook my head. It's nothing, just a nightmare. Yes, just a nightmare, a very long, very painful nightmare. My mom patted my shoulder, both amused and exasperated. You're grown up now, still crying over a nightmare. She flicked my nose, then untied her apron. I just got a call, have to work overtime unexpectedly, won't be back tonight. Glancing at the clock, she added, there's chicken soup in the pot, remember to have some later. Okay, I obediently acknowledged, watching her leave, yet before I could savor this resurrected bliss, the door suddenly knocked. I walked over to open the door opened, and the person standing outside was Marius. Seeing that face again, I froze instantly. Having lived 2 lifetimes, I wasn't mentally prepared to meet him yet, and there he suddenly appeared before me. My body instantly stiffened, and I found it hard to breathe. For no apparent reason, my eyes reddened in an instant. Only when I recalled the date on the perpetual calendar did I belatedly realize I had been reborn on the very night I had slept with Marius. It was also the day before everything had begun. A year ago, Marius was fond of wearing white clothes, with short black hair just reaching his forehead. Time had left no trace on his face. A man in his 30s, he still carried an air of youthful charm. It seems, I haven't seen him like this in a long time, in my last life. The final impression he left me was of a man with unkempt stubble, dark circles under his eyes, and a haggard appearance. I froze for a long moment, then ultimately took a small step back and called out with a light laugh, Uncle Marius. That single utterance of Uncle Marius marked both our farewell and our reunion. For some reason, when I called out Uncle Marius, Marius's body instantly stiffened. He stared blankly at me, his expression seemingly unchanged, yet in that very moment, his eyes seemed to dim instantly. I faintly guessed something. What if I wasn't the only one who was reborn? Perhaps because I'd already died once. I seemed to have grown much harder-hearted than in my previous life. I watched him quietly, witnessing the light fade from his eyes, seeing him suppress his emotions, watching as he held back until his eyes turned red. In the end, I still spoke softly, though my voice was slightly hoarse. Uncle Marius, is something wrong? It truly felt as if time had turned back to a year ago. He gazed at me quietly for a long time before finally speaking in a hoarse voice. It's nothing. Had a fight with the family, came to drink with your mom. The exact same conversation as in my past life. I nodded. Mom's working overtime tonight. She's on night shift and won't be back. Marius continued watching me silently the entire time, then very slowly uttered the same line from our previous life. Forget it then, stay safe at home. Taking a deep breath, he recited the lines from his past life. Well, I'll be going now. Everything seemed to have returned to how it was before. The only difference was, in my past life, I was the one who spoke up first, declaring myself the god of alcohol in the factory, insisting on drinking him under the table. But now, I simply watch him quietly. Though I claim to be hard-hearted, my eyes still redden bit by bit. I nod. All right, Uncle Marius, goodbye. I see it clearly. The moment I utter those words, the light in his eyes extinguishes completely. Goodbye. He turned and walked away slowly. The door closed gently, making no sound at all, yet to my ears it seemed as loud as thunder. I knew, and he knew too, that this was our final farewell. From now on, whenever we meet, he will only be Uncle Marius. Strange, isn't it? In my past life, I defied all conventions to be with him, stayed by his side even when he didn't love me, abandoned everything just to remain with him even though he never truly loved me. But now, it seems he has genuinely fallen for me. Given this second chance at life, this fresh beginning, it appears we might finally be able to be together without any obstacles. It seems like the perfect ending after all the twists and turns in a fairy tale. Yet, I gave up. Whether you'll love me in the future doesn't matter anymore. I still remember when Noel told me, my mom said we're the same kind of people. Others may not turn back until they hit the south wall, but we're the kind who would smash right through it and still refuse to turn around. That's right, both my mother and I are exactly like that. But, in my past life, I hit that south wall. I didn't break through it, nor did I smash it down. Instead, I died crashing headfirst into it. Now that I've been reborn, would I ever choose to kill myself again? No more. To repeat the same mistake is never a synonym for happiness. So, from now on, just call Uncle Marius when we meet again.